I worked road maintenance for most of my 20s, which sounds more official than it was. Most of the time it meant patching shoulders, replacing busted signs, cleaning culverts, flagging traffic in heat that made you hate everybody, and listening to older men complain about younger men not knowing how to work. I was never full-time with the state or anything like that. I bounced between contractors. If somebody had a small crew and needed an extra set of hands for a week or two, I showed up, wore the vest, did what I was told, and got paid. That was how I ended up near Shiprock, New Mexico, in July, on a job that was supposed to take 6 days, and ended with one guy in the hospital, one guy quitting before we even got our last check, and me driving home with my boots and work pants in a trash bag because I didn't want them in the cab with me. I'm going to say right away that I'm not Navajo, and I'm not going to act like I understand things I don't. I grew up in western Colorado, and I had worked around the Four Corners area before, but that doesn't mean I knew anything. I knew enough to be respectful, or I thought I did. I knew not to trespass. I knew not to go wandering around ruins or formations like a tourist with no sense. I knew people had beliefs about certain things, and I knew those things were not mine to play with. What I did not know was how fast a normal job could turn into something nobody wanted to name out loud. The job was roadside repair and sign work on a stretch outside Shiprock, mostly along roads that got chewed up by runoff and heavy trucks. We had washouts along the shoulder, missing delineator posts, one culvert that kept backing up with sand and trash, and a couple signs that had been bent or shot up, nothing unusual. There were 4 of us on the crew. Our foreman was a man named Calvin Yazzie, early 50s, calm, hard to impress, and not the kind of guy who wasted words. He had worked roads almost 30 years and could look at a shoulder washout for 5 seconds and tell you how much base you needed, where the water would go next storm, and which one of us had placed cones too close together. Then there was Luis, who was 40-something from Farmington, funny when he wanted to be but mostly quiet because he had 3 kids and always looked tired. Marcus was the youngest besides me, 24, from Albuquerque, strong, loud, friendly, and too eager to prove he wasn't scared of anything. I was 28, and I mostly kept my head down because I was new to that crew and wanted Calvin to call me again for the next job. We were staying in a cheap motel in Farmington and driving out each morning before the worst heat hit. It was still July though, so the worst heat hit by 10. The first day was a Monday. We met in the motel parking lot at 5, loaded coolers, checked cones and signs, and followed Calvin out in the company pickup. We stopped in Shiprock for fuel and breakfast burritos, then headed toward the first work area. I remember the light that morning, because it was one of those desert mornings that looked clean and peaceful before it started trying to kill you. The sky was pale blue, the ground was red and brown, and Shiprock itself sat out there looking too big and too still, like it had been there before everything else and didn't care what any of us were doing. Calvin was strict about where we parked and where we walked. He told us we were there to work the road and only the road. He said if something was on the other side of a fence, we did not need it. If a dog came around, we ignored it. If someone stopped to ask what we were doing, we let him talk. I thought it was just normal foreman rules. Marcus joked that Calvin made road repair sound like a military operation. Calvin didn't laugh. He just said, "You'll be fine if you listen." The first morning went by normal. We put out cones, cut away bad edges, shoveled, tamped, sweated through our shirts, and drank warm water out of plastic jugs because the ice was gone by 9. There were some houses set back from the road, a few trucks passing, a couple dogs barking from behind fences, and ravens hopping around whenever we dropped food. Around 11, we moved to a low spot where water had eaten a chunk out of the shoulder. The ground dipped toward a dry wash full of tumbleweeds, old bottles, a torn feed sack, and sun-bleached pieces of wood. That was where we saw the dog. It was on the far side of the wash, maybe 70 yards off, standing in the open. Medium-sized, dark brown or black, with one back leg held up. It looked skinny in the way a lot of stray dogs around roads look skinny. Its head hung low, and it took 3 little steps, then stopped. Marcus saw it first and said the poor thing was hurt. Luis looked once and went back to unloading tools. Calvin didn't even look up right away. Marcus kept watching it. He said it might need water. Calvin told him to leave it alone. Marcus didn't like being told that. He said it was a dog, not a bear. Calvin said it was not our dog. Marcus said he wasn't going to take it home, just give it water. Calvin finally turned and looked across the wash. His face changed, not a lot, but enough that I noticed. He told Marcus again, quieter this time, to leave it. The dog stood there through that whole exchange. That was the first thing that felt off, though I didn't admit it then. Most strays either come in because they want food or hang back because they're afraid. This one just watched. It did not sniff the ground. It did not pant with its tongue out. It did not look around at traffic. It looked at Marcus, not at all of us. Marcus. Marcus grabbed a half-empty water bottle from the bed of the truck and started toward the wash. He had maybe taken 4 steps before Calvin caught him by the back of his vest and yanked him hard enough to spin him. Marcus got mad right away. Calvin did not raise his voice. He said, "I told you no." That was all. They stared at each other for a few seconds. Marcus laughed like he was trying to make it into nothing, but his ears had gone red. He tossed the water bottle into the truck bed and said, "Fine." When we looked back across the wash, the dog was gone. There was nowhere good for it to go. That side was open for at least 100 yards, then low brush. It could have dropped behind something, sure. There were dips in the ground and little folds you couldn't see from the road. That was the explanation. It was enough for Monday morning. We worked until 3, cleaned up, and drove back dusty and burnt. Marcus complained twice about Calvin acting like he had tried to adopt a rattlesnake. Calvin ignored him. Luis told Marcus not to be stupid around animals out there. Marcus said everybody was acting weird over a limping mutt. That night at the motel, Marcus bought beer and sat outside his room in a plastic chair even though it was still hot. I was 2 rooms down. Luis was between us. Calvin had a room on the other side of the building because he did not like listening to us. I remember Marcus calling someone, probably his girlfriend, and telling her we had a dog whisperer foreman who thought every stray had a curse on it. He was laughing when he said it. I remember because later I kept thinking that if there was a single moment where he made himself known to whatever was out there, maybe that was it. Maybe it was before that, when he stepped toward the wash. I don't know. I only know it never looked at anyone else the way it looked at him. Tuesday started hotter. Some mornings you can tell early that the day is going to be mean. The air has no cool in it, even before sunrise. We got coffee that tasted burned, grabbed ice, and drove out. The first few hours were nothing but work. We replaced missing posts along a straight stretch where people drove too fast, then patched a broken edge near an entrance road. Marcus was quiet for once. I thought maybe Calvin had embarrassed him enough the day before that he wanted to prove he could just work. Around 10, we moved farther east, closer to open land with fewer houses. That was when the dog came back. It was standing near a road sign that had been twisted halfway around. Same dark body, same bad back leg, same low head. This time it was closer, maybe 40 yards off the shoulder. It stood in the heat shimmer behind the sign like it had been placed there. Luis saw it and muttered something in Spanish I didn't catch. Marcus saw it and smiled like he had just won an argument. "Same dog," he said. Calvin told him to get the post driver. Marcus kept looking at the dog. I don't know if you have ever watched someone trying not to be afraid by acting amused, but that was what he did. He made a little clicking sound with his tongue like you do for a dog. The dog did not come. It raised its head. Its ears looked wrong to me, too pointed or too torn. I could not tell because the light around it wavered. Marcus clicked again. Calvin stepped between him and the dog, blocking his view, and told him to work. For the next hour, I felt that dog without seeing it. That sounds strange, but there is a difference between being watched by a person and being watched by an animal. With a person, you get irritated. With an animal, you get alert. This was neither. It made the skin between my shoulders tighten. Every time I turned, it had moved. First it was near the sign, then it was beyond a cattle guard. Then it was up on a small rise, sitting in profile with the bad leg held stiff. It never came close enough for a good look. It never left all the way either. At lunch, we sat in the shade of the truck, which was not much shade but better than nothing. Marcus said he was going to call animal control if he saw it again. Calvin said there wasn't going to be anyone coming all the way out there for a limping dog unless it bit somebody. Luis said, "Then don't be the somebody." That should have ended it. Marcus was still bothered though. He said the dog looked hungry. I said most strays look hungry. He said this one looked like it was asking for help. Calvin stopped eating when he said that. He told Marcus not to talk about it like that. Marcus asked like what? Calvin said, like it wants something from you. Marcus made a face and said he was done with everybody's desert ghost stories. Calvin threw the rest of his burrito into the trash bag and stood up. He said there were no ghost stories on his crew, only instructions. If Marcus wanted to work, he could work. If he wanted to wander after animals, he could pack his tools and go home. That shut Marcus up for a while. Tuesday afternoon, we found the boot prints. They were around the equipment trailer we had left locked near a gravel turnout. The trailer had a hitch lock and a padlock on the rear door. Nothing was stolen. But somebody had walked around it during the night or early that morning. You could see prints in the dust. One set, maybe men's boots, maybe around size 10. They went around the trailer twice, then stopped near the tongue. From there, the prints got messy. Not like someone dragged their feet. More like the shape changed. There were marks that looked like bare toes pressed into the dirt. Then something like dog tracks heading down into the wash. I know what that sounds like. I know how people talk when they want to make something scarier after the fact. I am telling you what we saw. Boot prints around the trailer. Toe marks near the tongue. Dog-like tracks going down the slope. Calvin looked at them for a long time. Luis took off his cap and wiped his forehead. Marcus said somebody was messing with us. He sounded relieved to have a human explanation. Calvin told us to hook the trailer to the truck and not leave it there overnight again. We worked another 2 hours, but nobody joked after that. Even Marcus kept his mouth shut. The dog was gone. Or I thought it was. When we packed up and pulled out, I looked in the side mirror and saw it standing behind the trailer, right where the boot prints had been. It was not limping then. All 4 legs were on the ground. I turned in my seat to look out the rear window, and it was gone. I didn't tell anyone. That is one of those small, cowardly choices that bothers me. I didn't tell them because I did not want to be the guy making the job weirder. I didn't want Calvin thinking I was jumpy. I didn't want Marcus laughing, so I kept my mouth shut and watched the shoulder all the way back to Shiprock. At the motel Tuesday night, Marcus got the first phone call. We were outside again because the room smelled like old AC and cleaning spray, and even a hot evening felt better than sitting inside. Luis was talking to his wife. Calvin was somewhere else. I was cleaning tar off my forearm with a rag. Marcus's phone rang. He looked at it and said, "Why are you calling me?" He looked at me when he said it. My phone was in my pocket. I was not calling him. He held the screen up. It showed my name because we had exchanged numbers that morning in case we got split up on supply runs. I took my phone out and showed him it was dark. Marcus answered anyway, probably because he wanted to prove something. He said hello, then he went quiet. I could hear something from the speaker, but not words. Breathing maybe. Static maybe. Marcus held it away from his ear and looked annoyed. He said, "Real funny." Then he hung up. I told him I didn't call. He said he knew. He thought I had used some app. I said I hadn't. Luis came over and asked what happened. Marcus said somebody was playing with caller ID. He tried to laugh it off, but he went into his room after that and closed the curtains. At 2 a.m, something scratched on his door. I know because he called me, and that time it was really him. His voice was low and tight. He asked if I was awake. I said I was now. He said something was outside his room. I sat up and listened. Through the wall, faint but clear, I heard scratching. Not banging, not knocking. Scratching low on the door like nails dragging across paint. 3 slow drags, then a pause, then 3 more. I got out of bed and looked through the peephole. The walkway was empty in front of my room. Marcus was 2 doors down, so I could not see his door without opening mine. I called Luis. He answered half asleep and angry. I told him to look outside. A few seconds later, his door opened, chain still on, just a crack. I opened mine the same way. The scratching stopped the second our doors moved. The walkway lights were bright and ugly. There was nothing out there. Marcus opened his door after a minute and stepped out barefoot with a pocket knife in his hand. The bottom of his door had 3 white scratch marks through the brown paint, low enough that a dog could have made them. That was what we told ourselves anyway. Calvin came around the corner from the far side of the building while we were standing there. He had jeans on and boots unlaced like he had dressed in a hurry. He looked at Marcus's door, then at the parking lot, then past the motel toward the empty lots behind it. He told Marcus to sleep in Luis's room. Marcus said no. Calvin told him again. Marcus said he wasn't sleeping on a floor because a stray scratched his door. Calvin said, "Then put the table against it." Marcus did that. We heard him dragging furniture around after he went back in. Wednesday, he looked bad. Not sick exactly. More like he had not been alone in his own head all night. He had dark half-moons under his eyes, and he kept checking behind him. He said the scratching came back after we all went inside. He also said he heard someone whispering by the AC unit. I asked what it said. He told me it sounded like my voice again, but he couldn't make out words. He said if I was messing with him, it wasn't funny anymore. I told him again I wasn't. He believed me less than I wanted him to, and more than he wanted to. Calvin changed the plan that morning. We were supposed to work a culvert farther out, but he decided to stay closer to town and handle sign replacements near more traffic. Luis didn't question it. Marcus did. Calvin said the culvert could wait. Marcus asked if we were changing the work order because of a dog. Calvin looked at him for a long second and said, "Because I said so." We replaced 2 signs that morning. One had been bent almost flat, probably by a truck backing into it. The other had holes punched through it. We worked fast, and the sun came up mean. Traffic was steady enough that I started to relax. It's hard for your mind to stay on ghosts or monsters when you're trying not to get clipped by someone texting at 60 miles an hour. But around lunch, when we were eating by the truck near a wide dirt pullout, Marcus found the meat. It was under his windshield wiper, not wrapped, not in a bag, just a strip of raw meat tucked under the driver's side wiper blade, dark red and already drying at the edges. It looked like liver or something close to it. The smell hit once the heat got into it. Sweet, rotten, metallic. Marcus backed away like someone had put a snake on his hood. Luis gagged and walked off. I looked around for dogs, people, anything. The pullout was open on 3 sides. We had been within sight of the truck most of the morning. Nobody had walked up to it. Nobody we saw. Calvin used a shovel to flick the meat onto the dirt. Then he poured water over the windshield and wiped the spot with a rag he threw away after. Marcus kept asking who did it. Calvin did not answer. He told us lunch was over and to get in the truck. That was the first time Marcus really got scared in a way he could not cover. He sat in the back with his hands clenched and said there was no way a dog did that. Nobody argued. Luis kept looking at Calvin, waiting for him to explain. Calvin drove with both hands on the wheel and his jaw tight. Finally, Marcus said what we were all thinking, though not the exact word. He said, "Somebody out here is screwing with us." Calvin said, "Somebody maybe." Marcus asked what that meant. Calvin said not everything that looks hurt is asking for help. That was all he would say in the truck. We quit early Wednesday. Calvin called the office and said the heat was too much and we needed to move the schedule. That was a lie, or at least not the whole truth. We got back to Farmington around 3. Marcus bought a bottle of cheap whiskey from a store near the motel, and Calvin took it from him in the parking lot. Marcus almost swung on him. He didn't, but he got close enough that I stepped between them without thinking. Calvin told Marcus that getting drunk was how stupid things got inside your head. Marcus told him to stop acting like his dad. Calvin said if Marcus made it to Friday, he could hate him all he wanted. That sentence sat there. Marcus asked what was supposed to happen by Friday. Calvin looked tired then, older than he had that morning. He said nothing. He gave the bottle back but told Marcus if he drank, he was off the crew. Marcus took it into his room. I don't know if he opened it. I know he did not come back outside that night. The rest of us ate at a diner. Calvin barely touched his food. Luis finally asked him straight out if he knew what was happening. Calvin looked around before answering, not in a dramatic way, just checking who could hear. He said he knew enough not to talk about it in a restaurant. Luis asked if we should quit. Calvin said we should finish the work close to town, leave the far culvert, and be gone by Saturday morning. I asked about Marcus. Calvin rubbed his forehead and said Marcus had been noticed. I didn't like that word. Not followed, not targeted, not cursed, not even watched. Noticed. Like Marcus had raised his hand in a room he did not understand. Calvin told us not to say certain things at night and not to repeat any sounds we heard. He told us not to answer if we heard one of our names outside the room. He told us not to open the door unless we could see a real person through the peephole, and even then to call somebody first. Luis asked if we should call the police. Calvin said and tell them what? Stray dog, meat on windshield, scratches on a motel door. The police would take a report if we pushed, maybe drive through once, then leave. Calvin said human trouble was bad enough, but this kind got worse when people tried to challenge it. I asked him if he was saying Skinwalker. He looked at me so sharply, I wished I had kept my mouth shut. He said I didn't need to use words I didn't understand. I apologized. He accepted it with a nod, but the table stayed cold after that. That night, I slept with the chair under my door handle. It would not have stopped anyone serious, but it made me feel better. Around 1, I woke up because my room phone was ringing. Not my cell phone, the motel phone on the nightstand. I stared at it for 2 rings before picking up, which was stupid, but I was half asleep and thought maybe Calvin was calling. I didn't say anything, I just listened. At first there was only air, a faint open sound like the phone on the other end was outside. Then a man's voice said, "He's by the ice machine." It sounded like Luis. I hung up and called Luis's cell. He answered after a long time, groggy and irritated. He was in his room. I told him what happened. He went quiet. Then he said not to go outside. We called Calvin. Calvin told both of us to stay put. A few minutes later, I heard his boots outside my door. I looked through the peephole and saw him walking the walkway with a flashlight in one hand and a hammer in the other. He checked the ice machine. Nothing. He checked the stairs. Nothing. Then he stopped in front of Marcus's room. Marcus's door was open about 6 inches. I watched Calvin knock once and push it wider. I wanted to go out there, but I stayed where I was because he had told me to. A minute later, Luis came out anyway, and that made me come out too. Calvin was inside Marcus's room when we got there. The lights were on. The bed was empty. The little table was still pushed against the door, but not in front of it anymore. It had been moved aside. The bathroom was empty. Marcus's boots were gone. His phone was on the bed. We found him behind the motel, standing near the dumpster in his socks. He said he had boots on when he went out. He remembered that. He said he heard Calvin outside his door telling him to come help Luis. He looked through the peephole and saw Calvin standing there. He said Calvin looked annoyed and motioned for him to hurry up. Marcus opened the door. The person turned and walked down the stairs. Marcus followed him. By the time Marcus got behind the motel, there was nobody there. Then he heard panting by the dumpster and realized he was alone. His boots were found the next morning in the landscaping rocks near the office. Both were filled with sand. The laces had been tied together in knots so tight we had to cut them. That was Thursday morning. Nobody wanted to work. Calvin called the office again, and I could hear someone on the other end yelling because the schedule was slipping. Calvin took it without raising his voice. He said we would finish the culvert and shoulder repair that day and demobilize Friday. That meant going back to the farther stretch, the one he had been avoiding. Marcus said he was not going. Calvin said he could stay at the motel if he wanted, but he was not staying alone. Marcus said he would come. I wish he hadn't. I wish any of us had quit right then. But men are stupid around work in a special way. We had a job. The sun was up, the truck had fuel, the office expected progress. So we went. The culvert was in a bad spot where the road dipped just enough for water to gather and push sand across after storms. One side had a shallow ditch, the other dropped toward a dry wash with tamarisk and trash caught in it. There were old tire tracks down there, bottles, a busted pallet, and a lot of animal tracks. We set cones, parked the truck at an angle, and got to work clearing the culvert mouth. It was miserable work. Rotten water smell, mud under dry crust, flies and heat bouncing off the road. By 10, my shirt was soaked. By 11, nobody was talking. We found hair caught in the culvert grate, not dog hair exactly. Long, coarse, dark hair tangled around a bent piece of metal. Calvin saw it and told me to leave it. I had already reached for it with gloved fingers. He said my name in a way that stopped me. He used a shovel to clear around it without touching the hair, then told Luis to get the bolt cutters. We cut the bent piece off and tossed the whole thing into the trash pile without separating it. Marcus was watching the wash. I noticed because he had stopped working. He stood with a shovel in one hand and his head tilted. I asked what he saw. He told me the dog was down there. I looked. At first I didn't see anything. Then a dark shape moved behind the tamarisk, low and slow. One bad back leg dragged behind it. It stopped between two bushes where the shade was thick. I could see the outline of its head. It looked bigger than before. Maybe because it was closer. Maybe because I finally knew enough to be afraid. Calvin told Marcus to get in the truck. Marcus did not move. He said it had been following him all week. His voice sounded small, not angry anymore. Calvin said, "Get in the truck again." Marcus took one step back. The dog in the wash lowered its head until its chin almost touched the dirt. It made a sound I had never heard from any dog. A high hurt whine, like something with its paw caught. Marcus flinched when he heard it. His whole face changed. I swear it was like the sound reached into the softest part of him and pulled. He took one step forward. Luis grabbed his vest and dragged him back. Marcus fought him for a second. Not like he wanted to hurt Luis. Like he was waking up underwater and didn't know which direction was up. Calvin got between Marcus and the wash with a shovel held crosswise. He said something in Navajo under his breath. Not loud, not for show. The dog shape went silent. Then it stood up, not all the way. That is important. If it had stood up like a man, maybe my brain would have broken right there. It lifted its front half higher than any dog should, shoulders rising behind the brush, forelegs hanging wrong for 1 second before dropping back down. The head turned side to side. I saw a narrow muzzle, but above it the eyes were placed wrong, too forward, too aware. Then it dropped low and vanished so fast the brush barely moved. We loaded up right then. Calvin did not ask the office. He did not finish the culvert. He told us to pack tools. Marcus kept saying he was sorry. He said it sounded hurt. He said he knew it wasn't right, but it still sounded hurt. Luis told him to shut up, not cruelly, more like he could not stand hearing it. We threw tools into the truck bed. I cut my hand on a sign edge and didn't notice until blood was running down my wrist. When we got back to the motel Thursday afternoon, Calvin told us to pack our personal stuff and move rooms to a different hotel. He wanted interior hallways, cameras, more people. The office would be mad about the cost, but Calvin said the office could fire him from a safe building. Marcus sat on the curb while we loaded. He looked done. His face had that flat look people get after a crash. The motel manager came out while we were packing and said housekeeping found something in Marcus's room. She had it in a plastic grocery bag. Calvin told her to leave it on the ground. She did, looking offended. Inside the bag was another strip of meat, darker than the first one, wrapped in one of Marcus's dirty work socks. That meant it had gotten inside his room, or someone had. The manager started asking questions then. Calvin told her we were leaving. Marcus threw up in the parking lot. We moved to a larger hotel in Farmington with a lobby, elevators, bright hallways, and people around. It helped, but only some. Calvin took the room next to Marcus. Luis and I were across the hall. Calvin made Marcus give him his room key except for one. He told Marcus if he heard anything, he was to call one of us and not open the door. Marcus nodded. He had stopped pretending he was not scared. That night was the worst before the attack. Not because anything big happened, because small things happened all night, and none of us slept enough to deal with them. At 8, Marcus got a text from his own number. It said, "Outside," just one word. His phone was in his hand when it came through. Calvin took the phone, powered it off, and put it in the ice bucket under a towel. At 9, someone called the hotel desk from a room that did not exist and asked to be connected to Marcus by full name. The clerk called our room to ask if we were expecting someone. Calvin went down to the desk after that and told them not to connect calls to any of us. At 10, Luis heard scratching inside the wall behind his bed. Not outside, inside. He moved rooms, and I went with him because I did not want to be alone. At midnight, Marcus heard his mother crying in the hallway. His mother was in Albuquerque. He did not open the door. That might be why he survived the week. He called Calvin instead. Calvin stood in the hallway for 20 minutes with a chair from his room pulled outside, watching both directions. I watched through the peephole across the hall. The hallway was empty, bright, ugly carpet, ice machine humming at the far end. Still, at one point, Calvin turned his head sharply toward the stairwell like he had heard someone whisper in his ear. He did not go check. He just sat there until almost 1. Friday morning, Calvin told the office we were done. I heard enough of the call to know they threatened his job. He said they could put that in writing, then he hung up. He told us we were going back only to collect the trailer and warning signs. No work, no culvert, no shoulder repair. Just retrieve equipment and leave. Marcus said he wanted to stay at the hotel. Calvin said no. He said whatever was happening had found him at 2 motels and a hotel, and leaving him alone was not better. Marcus didn't argue. We went out in one truck, all 4 of us. The day was too bright. That is something I remember clearly. I wanted clouds. I wanted rain. I wanted anything except that open, clean sun making everything visible and still not making it safe. We drove through Shiprock, past gas stations and houses and normal morning traffic, then out toward the work zone. Nobody spoke. Even Marcus, who usually filled silence because he hated sitting inside it, said nothing. The equipment trailer was where we had left it, locked and untouched at first glance. The warning signs were still in place. Cones were scattered farther than we had left them, but wind could do that if a gust came through. Calvin parked close, engine running. He told Luis to hook the trailer, told me to grab cones, and told Marcus to stay in the truck. Marcus nodded. I had picked up maybe 6 cones when I heard Luis swear. The trailer coupler had something jammed into it. At first I thought it was a rag. Then I saw it had fur. Calvin came over with gloves and a pry bar. He worked it loose and flung it into the dirt. It was the lower part of an animal leg dried and twisted with the hoof still attached. A sheep or goat maybe. I don't know. It had been shoved into the coupler deep enough that we could not hook up without removing it. The smell hit us next. Something dead had been left under the trailer. Luis looked and backed away, gagging. Calvin told him not to touch it. We had to pull the trailer forward by hand a few feet because the truck could not hook yet. When we did, the thing underneath rolled into view. It was a coyote, or it had been. It was gutted clean down the middle and folded open, but the head was intact. The eyes were gone. In its mouth was a piece of orange safety vest. Marcus saw it from the truck. He opened the door and got out before any of us could stop him. He stared at the vest piece. Then he looked down toward the wash. He said, "That's from me." His voice was dead flat. He touched the tear on the bottom edge of his own vest, where a strip had been missing since Tuesday. None of us had noticed. Or if we had, we thought it snagged on something. Calvin told him to get back in the truck. From the wash, my voice said, "Marcus." I know it was my voice because hearing yourself from somewhere else is not something you mistake. It came from below the road, soft and clear. Marcus looked at me. I was 10 feet from him, holding a cone. My mouth was open, but I hadn't said anything. Luis crossed himself. Calvin lifted the pry bar. Then Luis's voice came from the wash. "Marcus, help me." Luis whispered, "No." Then Calvin's voice, "Get down here." Marcus took one step toward the edge. Calvin grabbed him and shoved him hard against the truck. Marcus snapped out of it and started crying. Not loud, just sudden. He kept saying he was sorry. Calvin told him to get in and lock the door. This time Marcus listened. He climbed into the back seat and locked himself in. We moved fast after that. Faster than safe. Luis got the coupler clear. Calvin hooked the trailer. I collected the last cones with my eyes on the wash. The voices kept coming, but they got worse as we ignored them. My voice, then Luis's, then a woman crying, then a little kid coughing, then the hurt dog sound from the day before. It was not loud. The road was still open. A truck passed us during it and did not slow. That made it worse somehow, knowing a normal person could drive past 10 feet away and not know what was happening. We were almost done when Marcus screamed from inside the truck. I turned and saw him pressed against the far door, looking down at the floorboard. Something was under the truck, not all the way under. A dark shape moved in the shade beneath the rear axle. The truck rocked once. Marcus tried to climb over the seat toward the front, but the doors were locked and his injured mind was not working right. Calvin yelled for him to stay inside. The thing under the truck made a scraping sound along the metal. Then I saw a hand come out behind the rear tire. It was not a paw. It was a hand with long fingers, dirt packed under the nails, and dark hair on the back of it. The fingers curled around the tire like it was testing the rubber. Luis threw the pry bar. It hit the ground near the hand, and the hand snapped back under the truck. The whole vehicle jolted. Marcus screamed again. Calvin got into the driver's seat and started laying on the horn. I grabbed the shovel and hit the side of the truck bed as hard as I could, not because that was smart, but because noise seemed to bother it before. Luis started yelling and throwing cones. The horn blared, the shovel clanged, the trailer chains rattled. From under the truck, something made a coughing sound that turned into a growl, and then into Marcus's voice saying, "Let me in." Marcus was inside the truck. Calvin threw it into gear. For 1 second I thought he was going to drive off with me and Luis standing there, and honestly, I would not have blamed him. Instead, he lurched the truck forward 2 feet and slammed the brake. Something rolled out from under the rear, fast and low. I saw a long back, patchy fur, a narrow head turned sideways, and then it was gone over the edge into the wash. It moved wrong, like its bones had been put together from memory. We did not finish cleaning. We left a cone, 2 signs, and the dead coyote. Calvin yelled for us to get in. Luis and I jumped into the bed because the trailer was hooked and there was no time to mess with seating. Calvin drove hard, too hard for towing. The trailer whipped once, and I thought we would lose it. I held the side rail and looked back. The dog was in the road behind us. It stood in the lane, no limp now, head low, mouth open. As we pulled away, it dropped its front half and ran after us. Not for long, maybe 3 seconds. Long enough for me to see that when it ran, its back legs moved like an animal's, but the front moved more like hands pulling against the ground. Then a pickup came around the bend behind it, and the dog shape leapt off the road into the wash so fast the driver probably never saw it. We made it back to Shiprock and stopped at a gas station because Marcus was hyperventilating, and Calvin needed to check the trailer hitch. I got out of the truck bed and nearly fell because my legs were shaking. Luis sat on the curb and put his head between his knees. Marcus stayed in the back seat. He had bitten his own knuckle open without realizing it. Calvin checked the hitch, checked the chains, then stood there with both hands on the tailgate like he might throw up, but refused to. A woman came out of the store carrying 2 sodas and looked at all of us. She was maybe late 40s, wearing scrubs, probably on her way to work. She looked at Marcus through the window, then at Calvin. She asked if we needed an ambulance. Calvin said no, not yet. She said that was not what she asked. He smiled a little at that, but it died fast. Marcus knocked on the window and said something we couldn't hear. I opened the door. He said the dog was at the edge of the parking lot. It wasn't. At least not when I looked. There was only sun, pumps, cars, and a man filling a red gas can, but Marcus was staring past all of it toward a dirt lot beside the station. His pupils were too big for daylight. He said it was sitting there wearing something. I asked what. He said my vest. We went inside the gas station because Calvin said walls were better than open space. I don't know if that was true, but it felt true. Marcus sat at a little table by the front windows and shook so hard the plastic chair clicked under him. The woman in scrubs brought him a bottle of water without being asked. Calvin thanked her. She looked at him and said, "You all need to go home." It was not a suggestion. Calvin asked if she knew someone who could talk to Marcus. Not a doctor, not a cop, someone. The woman understood. She looked at Marcus for a while and then asked, "Did he feed it?" Calvin said no. She asked if he followed it. Calvin did not answer. That was answer enough. She made a phone call. I didn't hear much of it. She spoke quietly, partly in English and partly in Navajo. Then she told us to stay where people were until an older man came. Marcus asked if it was a medicine man. She told him not to ask stupid questions. He shut up. The older man arrived about 40 minutes later in a white pickup with a cracked windshield. I'm not going to give his name even though I remember it. He was not dressed in any special way. Jeans, work shirt, old boots, cap. He looked like half the men you see at gas stations before 7 in the morning. He spoke to Calvin first, then to the woman, then looked at Marcus. He did not touch him. He asked Marcus what he had said to the dog. Marcus told him he had called it over on Tuesday and tried to give it water Monday. The man asked if Marcus had taken anything from the place where it first appeared. Marcus said no. Calvin asked about the meat, the calls, the motel. The man listened and did not react much. Finally, he told Marcus to take off the vest and boots. Marcus did. He looked embarrassed sitting there in a gas station in socks, but he did it. The older man took the vest outside without letting it touch his body. He put it in a metal trash barrel by the side of the building with Marcus's socks and the work gloves he had worn all week. He poured something from a jar over them. I don't know what it was, and I am not going to guess. He lit it. The smoke smelled sharp and bad and somehow clean at the same time. Nobody at the gas station seemed happy about it, but nobody stopped him. Then he told us we needed to leave before dark and not go back for any equipment. Calvin said the trailer had to be returned. The man said return it later with other people and in daylight, but not today. Calvin nodded. Marcus asked if it was going to follow him home. The older man looked tired when he answered. He said maybe, if Marcus kept turning around for it. He told Marcus 3 things. Don't answer any voice outside. Don't look for it in reflections. Don't pity it. That last one was the one Marcus repeated later. Don't pity it. Because pity was how it got him to step toward the wash. It had not scared him at first. It made him feel needed. That was worse. We left the trailer at a yard Calvin knew in Shiprock and drove back to Farmington in the company truck without stopping. Marcus rode up front between Calvin and Luis because nobody wanted him near a door. I sat in the back seat and watched the road behind us. Twice, I thought I saw a dark shape far off the shoulder, but I can't swear to it. Fear fills in blanks. I know that. I have tried to stay honest about what I saw and what I only think I saw. At the hotel, Calvin told the office we were done and that someone else could retrieve anything left on the route. The office yelled again. Calvin quit while still on the phone. He said he would email photos of the incomplete work and they could decide what to do. Then he hung up and sat on the edge of his bed with the phone in his hand for a long time. We should have stayed at the hotel and left in the morning, but Marcus got worse after sunset. At first it was just the shakes. Then he started hearing scratching behind the headboard. We moved him to Calvin's room. Then he heard it in the bathroom vent. We closed the bathroom door and put towels along the bottom. Then he started saying he could smell the meat from Wednesday. Nobody else smelled it at first. Around 9, we all did. It came through the room slow, like somebody had opened a rotten cooler. Sweet, bloody, spoiled. Luis gagged and stepped into the hall. I went with him. The hallway smelled normal. Inside the room, the smell got stronger. Marcus covered his face with a towel and started crying. Calvin checked under beds, behind curtains, inside drawers, Everywhere. Nothing. The smell stayed. At 10, someone knocked on the room door. We all froze. The knock came low, not at hand height. 3 soft hits near the bottom of the door. Calvin looked through the peephole. He stepped back fast. His face went slack for half a second. I had not seen him scared like that. Luis whispered, "What?" Calvin shook his head. Later he told me the hallway was empty, but the peephole view had been blocked at the very bottom by something dark pressed close to the door, like hair or hide. The knock came again. Low, patient. Then Marcus's mother's voice said his name from the hall. He made a sound and moved toward the door before any of us reacted. Calvin tackled him, not grabbed him, tackled him. They hit the floor hard. Marcus fought like a trapped animal. He kept saying his mother needed him. He was not pretending. He believed it. Luis and I held his legs, while Calvin held his shoulders, trying not to hurt the bandages on his knuckles. The voice outside kept calling him, soft and sad. Then it changed to the hurt dog whine. Marcus stopped fighting and sobbed into the carpet. The smell vanished all at once. We stayed on the floor for a long time. No one wanted to move first. Calvin decided we were leaving then, night or not. He said staying in one place made it easier. I don't know if that was true. Maybe he just could not stand waiting for the next knock. We packed in 10 minutes. The hotel clerk watched us leave like we were skipping out on a crime scene. Calvin paid for the rooms anyway. We got in the truck. Marcus sat in the middle again. Luis drove his own car behind us because he had brought it from Farmington and was not leaving it. I rode with Luis because there was no room in the truck. I did not want to, but I also did not want Luis driving alone. The plan was simple. Get to a busy hospital in Farmington, have Marcus checked in for stress or dehydration, or whatever normal words would make someone keep him indoors under lights until morning. Then split up and go home after sunrise. Marcus did not want a hospital. Calvin said he no longer got a vote. We were maybe 10 minutes from the hotel when Luis's headlights caught something running along the side of the road. It was on the right shoulder, keeping pace with Calvin's truck ahead of us. At first I thought it was a dog, because my brain still wanted that. Then it rose higher in the lights, and I saw one front limb reach out like an arm. It was not fully upright. It ran low and fast, but not like any animal I know. Luis cursed and braked. The thing kept pace with Calvin for another second, then veered into the darkness. Calvin's truck swerved, corrected, and kept going. Luis said he was done. He said it 3 times. He wanted to pull into the next lit parking lot and call police. I said keep driving. We argued for maybe 10 seconds, and then my phone rang. It was Marcus. I answered without thinking because we were in panic mode, and I could see Calvin's truck ahead, so I thought maybe Marcus had Calvin's phone or something. The voice on the line was Marcus, but it was not him. It said, "Tell them I fell out." I looked at Calvin's truck ahead of us. All the doors were closed. Marcus was inside. I hung up. My phone rang again. Luis told me to turn it off. I did. His phone rang next. He did not touch it. The screen said Mom. His mother had been dead 6 years. He threw the phone into the back seat so hard it bounced off the floor. We made it to the hospital parking lot. Calvin pulled up near the ER entrance and got Marcus out. I have never been so relieved to see sliding glass doors and security cameras. Marcus could barely walk, not because of an injury. His legs just weren't listening right. Calvin and Luis took him in. I stayed outside for a minute because Luis's phone was still ringing in the back seat, and I wanted it off. I opened the rear door, grabbed it, and saw the screen. The caller ID said Hurt Dog. Luis did not have a contact named that. I know because later I asked him, and he almost threw up. I powered it down and went inside. The hospital part was almost normal, which made it feel fake. Bright lights, forms, a nurse taking blood pressure, Marcus saying he was dehydrated and hadn't slept, Calvin doing most of the talking. They gave Marcus fluids and something to calm him down. His vitals were not great, but not terrible. He had a low fever. The knuckle he had bitten was cleaned and bandaged. They asked about drugs. He said no. They asked if he wanted to hurt himself. He said no. They asked if he felt safe. He looked at Calvin before answering and said not outside. We stayed there until after 2 in the morning. Nothing happened inside. That is another thing I want to be honest about. No monster in the hospital. No voice from the vents. No shadow at the end of the hall. It was safe because it was busy and lit and full of people doing real work. That did more for me than any prayer or warning. It reminded me that the world still had places where things had rules. Marcus was discharged around 4 with instructions to rest, hydrate, follow up, all the usual. Calvin wanted to wait until sunrise before leaving. We sat in the waiting area, half asleep, smelling coffee and floor cleaner. Around 5:30, the sky started going gray outside the windows. Marcus looked better. Not good, but better. He said he was sorry to all of us. Luis told him to stop saying it. Calvin said nothing for a while. Then he told Marcus that being kind was not the same as being careless. Marcus nodded like he was trying to memorize it. We left at sunrise. Saturday should have been quiet. In a way, it was. The roads had morning traffic. People were going to work, buying gas, walking into stores. The sky was clear. No calls came through because our phones were off or dead. Calvin drove Marcus back to Albuquerque himself. Luis drove home to Farmington. I followed Calvin for a while, then split off toward Colorado. Before I left, Marcus hugged me in the parking lot of a gas station outside town. I had known him 6 days. He hugged me like we had been through a war together, which I guess we had, though not one anybody else could see. He told me he kept hearing it even when it was quiet, not outside anymore. In his memory, the hurt whine, the way it sounded like it needed him. He said that was the part he hated most because there was still a piece of him that wanted to help it. Calvin told him that was how traps work. I went home and did not work for 3 weeks. I told my girlfriend at the time that a guy on the crew had a breakdown and we saw some weird animal stuff. That was all I could say without sounding insane. I threw away my gloves, my socks, and the work pants I had worn Friday. I cleaned my boots with bleach water and left them outside for 2 days. Then I threw those away too. I kept expecting calls from the company, but nobody called me except to ask where I had left one of the sign stands. I told them. They did not ask about the dead coyote, the strip of vest, the meat, or why Calvin had quit. Maybe they never sent anyone back. Maybe they did and decided not to tell me. About 2 months later, Luis called. We had not talked since that morning. He said Marcus was alive and doing better, but he had moved in with his sister for a while because he could not sleep alone. Calvin had refused to come back to work, not just for that company, but for any road crew. He was doing something with a cousin, hauling materials on private jobs. Luis said the company sent another crew to finish the culvert, and they lasted half a day. Officially, they left because of animal harassment and safety concerns. One guy claimed a dog kept coming out of the wash and standing near the cones. Another said he heard a woman calling from under the road. The culvert work got delayed until winter. That should be the ending. I wish it was. But one more thing happened in November, and it is the reason I am writing this instead of just letting it stay a bad memory between 4 men. I got a padded envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a cheap orange safety vest folded into a square. Not mine. Not exactly. Same type, but older, stiff with dirt. One bottom corner was torn away. There was a note typed on plain paper, no signature. It said, "Found this in trailer box. Yours?" I burned it in a metal trash can behind my apartment. I did not call Luis. I did not call Calvin. I did not call Marcus. I did not ask the company who sent it. I did not want to give it another road back to us. Maybe that was cowardly. I don't care. I burned it until the reflective strips curled and the orange fabric went black. Then I stirred the ashes with a piece of rebar until there was nothing recognizable left. After that, nothing followed me. No calls, no scratching, no hurt dog in the road. I am careful saying that because I don't want to make it sound like I beat anything. I didn't. Calvin knew enough to get us out. Other people helped us. And Marcus survived because for one night, when it mattered, he did not open the door. That is the whole victory. Not killing it, not proving it, not understanding it, just not answering. I have driven through Shiprock since then in daylight. I had to, twice. Both times I kept my windows up and did not stop unless there were other cars around. Shiprock itself looked the same. The roads looked the same. People were going about their lives. Dogs slept in shade. Nothing jumped out. Nothing chased me. That place is not the problem. I need to say that. People live there, work there, raise families there. Our problem was not the town. Our problem was that something out beyond the shoulder saw a young guy with a soft spot for hurt animals and used it like a handle. That is what I think about when people say they would never fall for something like that. They think fear is the bait. Sometimes it is. But sometimes the bait is your best instinct. You hear something crying and you want to help. You see a limping dog in the heat and you want to bring it water. You hear your mother outside the door and your body moves before your brain can stop it. That does not make you stupid. It makes you human. And there are things, human or not, that know exactly how to use that. So if you are ever working out near those roads in the summer and you see a dark dog limping beside a wash, leave it alone. Call whoever you need to call from somewhere public if you really think it's an animal. Don't click your tongue at it. Don't walk toward it with water. Don't talk about how sad it looks. And if it shows up again farther down the route, watching from behind a sign like it knows your schedule, get in the truck and leave. Because if it wanted help, it would act like a dog. The one we saw acted like a person pretending to be one. I want to be upfront that I don't believe in much. I'm not a churchgoer. I don't read horoscopes. And when people tell me ghost stories, I usually find a reason to be somewhere else. So I'm not the guy who was looking to have an experience. I'm telling you that because by the end of this, you're going to think I'm exactly that guy, and I'd rather you knew going in that I wasn't. The summer this happened, I was 29, and I'd been working seasonal jobs for the Forest Service for about 6 years. Trail crew mostly, some fire support, the kind of work where you live out of a duffel and move where they send you. That July I was on the Arizona side of the Chusca Mountains, which run up the line between Arizona and New Mexico, a long high range with Ponderosa up top, and the Navajo Nation spread out all around the base of it. I'd been doing trail maintenance and I was good at it, and I kept my head down and I didn't ask for much, which I think is part of why they tapped me for the lookout. There's a fire lookout tower up there. A real one, the old steel kind. A little 14 by 14 glass cab sitting up on top of a tower maybe 40 feet off the ground. One road in, and the road's bad, total isolation. The woman who normally staffed it that season, a long timer, had to go off the mountain partway through July for a medical thing, gallbladder I heard, and they needed somebody to cover the tower for a stretch while she recovered. About a week. They asked me because I was already in the area. I was reliable, and I didn't have a family situation that made being unreachable a problem. I'd never done lookout work, but it's not complicated. You sit up there, you watch for smoke, you call it in. I took it. The pay bump was nothing special, but a week of sitting in a chair sounded a lot better than a week of swinging a Pulaski. And I'll be honest, the solitude appealed to me. I like being alone. I was looking forward to it. The district guy who drove me partway up and pointed me at the road, a guy named Hollis, was the first person who acted strange about it, and at the time, I read it as nothing. He went over the radio procedure, the 2 daily check-ins, morning and evening, told me where the regular lookout kept the water and the propane and the spare batteries, all the practical stuff. And then sort of at the end, almost like he was working up to it, he told me the regular lookout had left some notes for whoever covered, and that I should read them, and that some of them were going to sound odd, but to follow them anyway because she'd been on that tower a long time, and she knew the place. I said sure. He didn't quite look at me when he said the part about the notes. Then he left me with the truck and the road in, and drove back down, and I drove the last stretch up to the tower myself, parked at the bottom, and hauled my gear up the stairs. The cab was clean and tight and had everything you'd want. A bunk, a little propane two-burner, the fire finder in the center, that big circular map thing on a stand you use to take bearings on smoke. Windows on all four sides, a catwalk running around the outside. The view was the whole reason people fought over lookout postings. You could see the Ponderosa falling away on all sides, the high desert beyond it going on forever, the red country way out to the west, and the New Mexico flats to the east. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever worked. I want that on the record too, because of how I feel about it now. The notes were in a spiral notebook on the little table, and most of them were exactly what you'd expect. Where the leaks were, how to coax the propane fridge, which radio channel was reliable and which one dropped out, a reminder to log your check-ins and your weather. The regular lookout had small, tidy handwriting and a dry sense of humor, and after a few pages I liked her without having met her. And then there were the other notes. They were at the back, separated from the practical stuff by a few blank pages, like she'd wanted them apart. I'm going to give them to you close to how she wrote them, because the wording stuck with me. The first one said, "If someone calls up from the bottom of the tower at night, do not answer, and do not go down. It does not matter what they say." The second one said, "If you hear a voice on the radio that you recognize, but dispatch has no record of the transmission, do not respond to it. Log the time. Do not log it as a person." The third one said, "Do not record movement in the off hours. If you see something move at night, you did not see it. Do not write it down, and do not call it in." The fourth one was shorter than the others, and it was underlined twice. It said, "You get one bad week, get through it. Then they take you off and you don't come back." I read those 4 notes sitting in that chair in the late afternoon light with the whole beautiful world spread out around me, and I'll tell you exactly what I thought. I thought, this poor woman has been up here alone too many summers and it's gotten to her. Cabin fever, lookout fever, whatever you want to call it. People who do solitary postings for years sometimes get a little strange, develop rituals, talk to themselves, get superstitious. I figured these notes were the residue of that, a list of comforting little rules she'd built up to manage the loneliness, and I felt sorry for her, and I closed the notebook and made my dinner and watched the sun go down and didn't think about the notes again that night. The first night was quiet. I slept fine. Nothing happened the first 2 days. I want to be clear about that because of the way these stories usually go, where it's all spooky from minute 1. It wasn't. The first 2 days were the good job I'd been promised. I did my morning check-in. I watched. I did my evening check-in. I read a paperback. I cooked. I slept. The weather was clear, no smoke anywhere, just the country sitting out there changing color with the light. I got into a routine fast, the way you do. Up before the sun, coffee on the two-burner. The morning check-in at the time they'd given me. Then the long middle of the day, which is mostly just watching. And watching is more work than people think. You learn the country. You learn where the dust kicks up off the ranch roads way out in the flats, so you don't mistake it for smoke, where the morning haze pools in the low spots and burns off by 10, which far ridge catches the light in a way that looks like a thread of smoke for about 15 minutes every evening, and isn't. You learn the regular aircraft, the little prop planes that cross the same way every day. I'd brought 2 paperbacks and I rationed them. I ate simple, cans and rice and whatever wouldn't spoil. In the afternoons, the heat came up even at that elevation, and the cab got close and I'd take my chair out onto the catwalk and sit in the shade on the north side with my feet up on the rail and watch the world and feel like the only person in it. There was one hiker, actually, the second day, a real one, a college-aged kid with a big pack who came up the trail that crossed below the tower, and I called down to him and he waved and we talked for a minute, him at the bottom, me on the catwalk, the normal way. He was through hiking a section of the range and he asked about water sources and I told him what I knew and he thanked me and moved on. I bring him up because he was the only actual human being I laid eyes on the entire week, and because of how different it was, talking to a real person at the bottom of that tower in the afternoon from what came later. At the time, it was just a pleasant 2 minutes. I had no idea I'd be turning it over in my head afterward, comparing it, the realness of it. I remember actually thinking, on the second evening, that I'd lucked into the best week of work I'd had all year, and I should try to get more lookout assignments going forward. That's where my head was at. It started on the third night, and it started small. There was a thing earlier on that third day, in the afternoon, that I didn't count as anything until later. I'd been glassing the slopes out of boredom, not for smoke, just looking at the country through the cab's window. And down the trail where the real hiker had passed the day before, I saw a figure standing. Just standing, off the trail, in the trees, a good distance down. I figured it was another hiker, and I waited for it to move along, and it didn't. It stood there in the same spot for a long time, long enough that I went and made a sandwich and came back and it was still there, in the same place, not sitting, not moving, just standing among the ponderosa facing up toward the tower. By the time the light started to slant in the late afternoon, it was gone, and I never saw it come or go. And I told myself it had been a snag, a dead trunk, a trick of the eye, that I'd stared at a burnt tree for an hour and decided it was a person, which is the kind of thing a tired brain does. I more or less believed that. I want to be honest that I more or less believed that at the time. It was only after the footsteps that night that the standing figure moved itself into a different category in my head. I woke up sometime after midnight to footsteps. Down at the base of the tower on the ground, slow footsteps circling the 4 steel legs. I lay in the bunk and listened to them go all the way around, once, unhurried, gravel and dirt under boots. And then they stopped. I sat up. My first thought was a bear, because bears will come around a tower, but bears don't sound like that. Bears don't walk a clean circle on 2 feet. My second thought was a person, some hunter or some lost hiker who'd seen the tower and come to it. And that thought I actually liked, because it meant a person, and a person I could deal with. I went to the window and looked down, and the moon was good, and I could see the base of the tower clearly, and there was nothing there. No one. The footsteps had stopped, and there was nobody at the bottom of the tower. I stood at the window a while, then I told myself I'd half dreamed it, the way you do, and I went back to the bunk. I did not go down. I want to point that out. I didn't go down, and at the time it wasn't because of the note. It was just because I'm not an idiot, and you don't go climbing down a 40-foot tower in the dark to check on a sound. But I didn't connect it to the note. Not yet. I was tired enough the next day that I half forgot it. Did my work. Clear skies again. And that evening, after my check-in, the radio did the thing. I need to explain the radio a little. It's a Forest Service handheld and a base unit, and the channels are shared, so you hear other traffic sometimes, other crews, dispatch, repeaters carrying voices from a long way off. It's normal to hear chatter that isn't directed at you. So when the radio crackled that evening, well after my check-in, I didn't think anything of it at first. And then a voice came over it, clear, and it said my name. Not a call sign, my actual name. It said it the way Hollis said it, the district guy, the same flat cadence, and for a second I genuinely thought it was Hollis calling up to check on me. I keyed the mic and answered. I said I was here. Everything was fine. And there was nothing. No response. Dead air. I waited, said it again, asked who was calling. Nothing. I called dispatch on the proper channel and asked if anybody had just tried to raise me, if Hollis or anybody from the district had transmitted in the last few minutes. The dispatcher checked and said no. No traffic on my channel. Nothing logged. Nobody had called up to the tower. I said I must have caught some bleed over from another channel, a repeater catching somebody else. And the dispatcher said sure, that happens up high, and we left it there. But it had said my name. Repeaters catch other crews talking to each other. They don't catch a voice saying your specific name into dead air with no one on the other end. I sat with that for a while, and then I made myself remember the second note. If you hear a voice on the radio that you recognize, but dispatch has no record of the transmission, do not respond to it. Log the time. Do not log it as a person. I'd already responded. I'd keyed the mic and answered it before I'd thought about anything. And sitting there in the dark cab, I felt the first real cold drop into my stomach, because that note had described precisely, in advance, the exact thing that had just happened. Not vaguely. Precisely. A recognized voice. No record of the transmission. She'd known. Whatever she was, that woman had not been writing down the residue of loneliness. She'd been writing down instructions, and one of them had just come true, and I'd already broken it. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the radio on low, and I lay there, and around 2 or 3 the footsteps came back, circling the tower, slow, and this time I didn't go to the window. I just listened to them go around and around, more than once now, 3 or 4 times, patient, and then stop. And after they stopped, after a long quiet, the radio crackled again, and the same voice, my voice, the district guy's cadence, said my name once more, soft, almost gentle, and I did not answer it. I lay there with my hand over my mouth like a kid, and I did not answer it, and I logged the time in the notebook, the way she said to, and I did not write down that it was a person. But it didn't leave it at the once. That's the part I haven't gotten across yet, how it kept on. After the first soft call of my name there was a wait, a couple of minutes maybe, and then it came again. The same flat cadence, my name, and another wait, and then again. It wasn't trying different things yet. It was just saying my name into the radio at intervals, all through the back half of the night, the way you'd keep saying something to a person you were sure could hear you and were waiting out. Sometimes the gaps between were long enough that I'd start to think it had finally quit, and I'd feel my shoulders come down off my ears, and then the radio would crackle and there it'd be again. My name. Patient. It never raised its voice. It never sounded frustrated. It had all night, and it knew it, and it just kept laying my name down on the dead air, soft, over and over, and I lay there and took it and did not key that mic again. And that was maybe the longest stretch of my life, lying in a steel box 40 feet up in the dark listening to my own name come up out of a radio, in a voice that had no person behind it. The 5th day, I was rattled, and not hiding it well on my check-ins, and I think dispatch could hear something in my voice, but I kept it together enough that nobody asked. Daylight helped. In daylight the whole thing felt insane, felt like exactly the lookout fever I diagnosed in the regular lookout 2 days before. And part of me was furious at myself for letting a few weird noises and a radio glitch get into my head. So that afternoon, to prove something to myself, I did something I'd been trained to do that I hadn't really used yet. I sat down at the firefinder, the big circular sighting map, and I started glassing the tree line and the slopes below the tower, methodically, sector by sector, the way you would for smoke. I told myself I was practicing. I wasn't. I was looking for whatever had been walking around my tower, and I found it. Down the slope to the northeast, maybe 400 yards out, in and among the ponderosa, something was moving. I caught it through the sighting alidade, and then I lost it, and then I found it again. And I want to describe this carefully because it's the part I've never been able to explain away. It was moving between the trees, going from trunk to trunk, and it was the size of a person, and it moved upright sometimes, and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it dropped and went low and fast across the open ground between 2 trees, and then came up again behind the next one. The way it bent. The joints were wrong. When it went low, it folded in a way that a person's legs and arms don't fold. Too many angles. And it covered the open gaps between trees faster than a man could sprint. A blur of it. And then it would be still again behind a trunk and I'd have to hunt for it. It worked its way across the slope below me like that for a few minutes, never coming closer, never going away, like it was pacing the base of my tower from a distance the way the footsteps paced it at night. And then it went still behind a tree, and I lost it and it didn't come out again, and I sat there with my eye against that alidade for probably 20 minutes, waiting for it to move, and it never did. That was in daylight, bright afternoon. No fever, no half-dream, no radio glitch. I watched it for several minutes through good optics, and the third note went through my head. Do not record movement in the off hours. If you see something move at night, you did not see it. But this wasn't the off hours. This was the middle of the afternoon, and I'd seen it plain. And I understood then that the rule about night was about not feeding it, not giving it the attention, and that the thing didn't actually care what time it was. It had only been polite enough so far to keep to the dark. I called nobody. I didn't log it. I sat in that cab as the light went down and the cold came back into my stomach and stayed there. And I thought about the road out. And I thought about the fact that the road out was 40 feet of open stairs down to the ground, and then a long, bad drive in the dark. And that everything I'd seen happened on the ground, at the base of that tower, on that slope. And that the one place it had not been able to get to was up here in the cab. I did the math on leaving, that evening, seriously. The truck was at the bottom, keys in my pocket. If I went down right then, in the last of the light, I could be off the mountain in under an hour, and at the district office or the clinic or anywhere with other people by full dark. I sat with that. And what stopped me wasn't the notes, and it wasn't bravery. It was that going down meant being on the ground, and being on the ground in the dark was the one thing I'd watched it own all week. And the drive out was miles of bad road through the trees where the headlights only reached so far, and I could not make myself believe I'd reach the truck and get it started and get down that road before the thing that crossed open ground faster than a man can sprint decided to be on the road with me. Up high, I had walls and 40 feet of air, and the one thing that had worked, which was fire. Down there I had a dark cab and a windshield. So I decided the cab was safer than the road, and I've gone back and forth 1,000 times since on whether that was the right call or whether I just talked myself into staying, because the body wants walls around it at night. But it's the call I made. I decided I would not go down at night for any reason. I would get through to morning and I would do my evening and morning check-ins, and I would tell Hollis at the next opportunity, in daylight with the radio working, that I wanted off the tower. I told myself I only had to get through to the end of the week. I remembered the fourth note, the one underlined twice. You get one bad week. Get through it. The fifth night it learned a new voice, and the fifth night is when I understood that it was trying to get me to come down. The footsteps started earlier, before midnight, and there were more of them, or it was moving faster around the legs of the tower, I couldn't tell. And then, from the base of the tower, a voice called up. Not the radio this time. From the ground, calling up the 40 feet to the cab. And it wasn't the district guy's voice. It was a hiker, a man's voice, scared, ragged, calling up that he was lost, that he'd been out 2 days, that he'd seen the tower light and please, was anybody up there? He needed help. He needed water. It was good. It was so good. Every break in the voice was right. Every bit of the exhaustion and the fear was exactly what a genuinely lost man sounds like. And I lay in that bunk and my whole body wanted to get up and go to the window and call down to him, and I did not. Because I knew the way you know in a dream that the thing wearing your friend's face is not your friend, that there was no lost hiker, that nothing had driven up that road, that the tower was 40 feet up for a reason, and the reason was standing at the bottom of it asking me to come down. It called for a long time, the hiker. It begged. It got angry, a little, the way a desperate man would, then went back to begging, and then it stopped being the hiker. There was a quiet, and then a different voice came up from the bottom of the tower, and it was the regular lookout, the woman whose notebook I'd been reading, calling up in an old tired voice that she'd come back early, that the medical thing was fine, that she was at the bottom, and she couldn't manage the stairs in the dark, and would I come down and help her up? I had never heard her voice. I didn't know her voice. And the thing was using it anyway, gambling that I would, and that told me something about it that I've never shaken, which is that it didn't actually know what I knew. It was just trying everything, working through faces, looking for the one that would bring me down those stairs. I didn't answer any of them. The hiker, the woman. I lay still, and I did not answer, and somewhere in the worst of it I started saying, just barely out loud, just to have something of my own in the cab with me, the words of the fourth note, get through it, get through it, get through it. And at some point much later than I expected, the voices stopped, and the footsteps stopped, and the night went quiet, and the windows started to go gray, and I had gotten through it. The 6th day I did my morning check-in, and I tried to tell Hollis I wanted off the tower, but Hollis wasn't on. It was somebody else at the district, and I didn't know how to say what I needed to say to a stranger over an open channel without sounding like a man who'd lost it. So I said something about not feeling well, asked when the regular lookout was due back, and the answer was 2 more days. 2 more days. I sat with that all through the 6th day, glassing the slopes every hour even though I'd told myself to stop, never seeing it in the daylight again, but feeling it out there. And as the light started to go, I made up my mind that I was not spending the 7th night the way I'd spent the 5th. I didn't have a plan exactly. I just knew that the cab had kept me safe so far, that fire or flame had come up at the edge of my mind more than once as the thing that mattered, and I made sure the propane 2-burner was full, and I set it where I could reach it from the bunk, and I kept a lighter in my hand, and I waited. The 6th night it climbed the tower. It came earlier than the other nights. The footsteps, then nothing, then the whole tower moved, not the wind. A weight came onto the stairs, down at the bottom, and started up, and the steel of those stairs carries every footfall right up into the cab through the legs of the tower, and I lay there and felt it come up. 1 flight, the half landing. Turn, the next flight. It was not in any hurry. It came up the way it had walked the circle, slow and patient and certain, and the higher it got, the more I could feel each step in the floor under my bunk. And I sat up with the lighter in my hand and my back against the far wall, and the propane burner beside me, and I watched the door. There's a hatch at the top of lookout stairs, and then the cab door. I'd thrown the little hook latch on the door, which is nothing, which wouldn't stop a determined person, let alone whatever this was. The steps came up the last flight. They came across the catwalk, the boards of the catwalk taking the weight, around toward the door, slow, and then they stopped, right outside it. And the door handle moved, and the door came open against the little hook latch, an inch, the hook holding it, the gap dark, and a smell came in that I can't describe and don't want to. Something like an animal, and something like rot, and something underneath that was worse than either. And through that inch of open door I did not see a face, and I'm grateful for that. I just saw the dark of it pressed up against the gap, and felt it deciding, in that pause, whether the hook was worth bothering with. It wasn't. The door came in. The hook tore out of the wood, and the door swung and the thing started through it, and I did the only thing I had. I had the propane burner turned up and I struck the lighter, and I lit it, full, a hard rush of blue flame, and I shoved it forward toward the doorway, toward the dark coming through it, and I screamed. I'm not proud of the screaming, but I screamed. And the flame caught the edge of whatever it was, and there was that sound, not a roar, a hard sharp exhale, a huff, low and close and felt in the chest more than heard, and the dark in the doorway pulled back. It went back out the door and across the catwalk, and I came up off the bunk with the burner held out in front of me like the only thing in the world, following it out onto the catwalk, screaming, the flame between me and it went over the rail. It didn't take the stairs. It went over the catwalk rail and down the outside of the tower into the dark, 40 feet, and there was no sound of it landing, and then there was nothing. But before it went, on the catwalk, in the light of that burner held up close, it got me, one reach. It raked down my left forearm, which I'd thrown up, and across the left side of my face, and I felt it more than I understood it in the moment. 4 lines of cold that turned to fire a second later, and then it was over the rail and gone, and I was alone on the catwalk 40 feet up with a propane burner in my hand and blood running down my arm and off my chin onto the steel. I went back into the cab and I latched what was left of the door, and I sat against the wall with the burner lit beside me, low now, just the pilot, all the way to dawn, and I did not sleep, and the thing did not come back. When the windows went gray, I got on the radio, the proper channel, dispatch, and I didn't dress it up this time. I told them I'd been injured, that I needed off the tower, that I needed someone to come now. I didn't say what did it. I said an animal had gotten into the cab in the night, and I'd been clawed, and I needed medical, and I needed out. A truck came up the road within a couple hours. I went down those stairs in full daylight, in the sun, with 2 other men there, and even then, in the sun, with company, I came down them fast, and I didn't look at the slope to the northeast. They patched me at the clinic down in the valley. 4 parallel cuts down the forearm, and 3 across the cheek and the jaw, deep. And they asked what animal, and I said I didn't get a good look in the dark, and the guy stitching me, who was dying, an older guy, stopped for a second when I said which tower it was, just stopped, and then kept stitching, and didn't ask me anything else. He didn't ask what animal again. He just finished the work and taped me up, and at the end he said quiet, not really to me, that they shouldn't keep putting people on that tower. That was all. They shouldn't keep putting people on that tower. The cuts didn't heal clean. I'll say that much about it without making more of it than I should. The face ones closed up more or less on schedule, but the 4 on the forearm went wrong. Got hot and swollen around the stitches in a way the clinic didn't like, and they had me back twice and put me on antibiotics. And for about a week and a half, the arm was bad enough that I slept with it propped up and woke up every time I rolled onto it. The doctor down there never said anything strange about it, just treated it like a stubborn infection, switched me to a different antibiotic the second visit, and eventually it turned and healed. But it took longer than 4 cuts should take, and the scars came in wider and paler than the ones on my face, raised a little, and on a cold morning, the whole forearm aches deep, down in the bone, which cuts in the skin have got no business doing. I keep it covered. Long sleeves all year. It's easier than the questions. The regular lookout called me about a week and a half later. I don't know how she got my number. The district, probably. She didn't waste time on small talk. She asked if I'd had a bad week, and I said I had. She asked if I'd kept to the notes, and I said I had. Mostly. I'd answered the radio the first time before I understood, and she went quiet at that, and then said that was probably why it got as bad as it did. That the first answer is the one that tells it you can hear it, and after that, it doesn't stop. She said it without any drama, the same dry voice as the notebook. And then she told me the thing that I think about most. She told me the tower sits on a line, that the place it's built, the sight line it commands, the very thing that makes it a good lookout, was ground the Dine had asked the Forest Service decades ago to leave alone, and the Forest Service had built the tower there anyway, because it was the best spot on the mountain to see smoke from. She said every relief lookout who covers that tower gets 1 bad week, always, and that the regulars who last are the ones who learn the rules and never break them, and never stay long enough at a stretch to make it personal. She said she was sorry she hadn't told me more before, that you can't, that telling someone too much before they've been through it just makes them go looking, and going looking is the worst thing you can do. She said it like she'd had to learn that the hard way too. I asked her the one thing I'd been carrying since the 5th night. I asked her why it had used her voice, called up to me as her, when I'd never even heard her speak. And she was quiet for long enough that I thought the line had dropped. Then she said that it doesn't always need to have heard a voice to use it, that it pulls the shape of who you'd open the door for out of you, not off a recording, and that the fact it had reached for her meant it had understood somehow, that I'd been sitting up there for days reading her handwriting and half talking to her in my head, that I'd made her into the one person on that mountain I half trusted, and so that was the voice it tried. She didn't say it to scare me. She said it the flat way she said everything, like a fact she'd made her peace with. And then she said the part I've never been able to put down, which was that I should be glad it had to guess, because the people it doesn't have to guess about, the ones it already knows exactly whose voice will bring them down the stairs, those are the ones who don't get a phone call after. Then she thanked me for covering, and she said she hoped my face healed up, and she hung up, and I never spoke to her again. The Forest Service decommissioned that tower the following season. I know because I asked, the next summer, when I was deciding whether to take another seasonal job in that district, and I was told the tower had been taken out of service, that they were using aircraft and cameras for that sector now. I asked why, and the guy didn't really know, said it was old and the access road was bad and it wasn't worth maintaining. Old and a bad road. There are 100 old towers on bad roads still standing and still staffed. They took that one out. I've got the scars. 3 on my face that I tell people came from a dog when I was a kid, because that's easier than the truth, and 4 on my left forearm that I keep covered. I quit fire and trail work after that season. I do other things now, indoor things, in town. I sleep with a light on, which at my age is an embarrassing thing to admit, and I will not be alone in a building at night if I can help it. People who hear pieces of this sometimes want me to say the name of what came up that tower, what wore the hiker's voice and the old woman's voice and reached through that door. I won't. The regular lookout never said it once, not in the notebook, not on the phone, and I've come to understand that not saying it is part of how you keep from inviting it. So I've told you everything that happened on that mountain, and I've gotten all the way to the end of it without saying the word, and I'm going to keep it that way. I still have the hospital bracelet from Chinle folded in a Ziploc bag with the police card, 2 gas receipts, and the cracked plastic cover from my girlfriend's brother's camera. I kept all of it because for a while I thought somebody would ask for proof, and then later I realized I didn't want anybody asking. Proof doesn't help the way people think it does. It just makes you go back through the same week over and over, looking for the first moment when you should have turned around. For us, that moment was probably before we ever got to Arizona. We had no business treating that trip like a normal summer vacation. We didn't know that yet, and I hate that we had to learn it the way we did. This happened in July, a few years back, when I was 26. My girlfriend at the time was named Jenna, and her older brother was Aaron. We had been together almost 3 years, and Aaron and I got along fine, but he was one of those guys who could make an easy trip feel like a job. He was not a bad person. I want that clear. He was just intense about anything he cared about, and that summer, he cared about photography. He had bought a used full-frame camera, 2 lenses, a carbon fiber tripod he talked about like it was a child, and a hard case full of batteries, filters, South Dakota cards, microfiber cloths, and little tools I didn't understand. He wanted desert shots, canyon shots, and night sky shots. He had a list on his phone of places he wanted to shoot, and Canyon de Chelly was at the top. Jenna wanted to go because she had driven through Chinle once as a kid with her dad and remembered the canyon overlooks being beautiful. I wanted to go because I had not taken a real break from work in almost a year, and a week in northern Arizona sounded simple. We lived in Phoenix then, so it was not some huge expedition. We planned to drive up on Sunday, stay 6 nights, hit the overlooks, maybe do a guided canyon tour if we could get one, eat bad road trip food, and come home the next Saturday. Aaron had taken the whole week off. Jenna had packed like we were moving there. I threw clothes in a duffel and assumed everything would be fine because most things had been fine up to that point in my life. We left Phoenix before sunrise on Sunday because Aaron wanted to be in Chinle early enough to scout the south rim before sunset. The drive was normal in the way long Arizona drives are normal. Heat, gas stations, miles of open road, the smell of sun-warmed plastic inside the car. All of us too tired to talk much for the first couple hours. Aaron sat in the back with his camera bag wedged between his knees. Every time we stopped, he checked it like someone might have stolen a lens while we were pumping gas. Jenna drove the first stretch. I took over near Payson, and by the time we passed through the wide, dry country farther north, everyone had loosened up. Aaron started showing me photos of Spider Rock and explaining how the light would hit it in the evening. I remember nodding even though I was only half listening. I remember Jenna eating sunflower seeds and dropping the shells into an empty coffee cup. I remember thinking the trip felt easy. We got to Chinle in the early afternoon. We were staying at a motel off US 191. Nothing fancy, just one of those places where the rooms open to the parking lot and you can hear every truck that passes at night. The woman at the front desk was nice but quiet. She gave us 2 rooms side by side. Jenna and I took one. Aaron took the next one. The parking lot had sun-faded lines, a couple of cottonwoods at the edge, and a skinny brown dog sleeping in the shade near the ice machine. That dog is one of the things I have replayed a lot because it noticed something before any of us did. When we unloaded the car, the dog lifted its head and watched Aaron. It didn't bark at me. It didn't bark at Jenna. But when Aaron walked past with his camera case, the dog stood up, back toward the office wall, and started growling. Not a warning growl either. It was low and steady, and its lips pulled back far enough that I could see the black along its gums. Aaron laughed and said it must not like Nikon people. Jenna told him not to mess with it. He took 2 steps toward it, not aggressive, just being Aaron, and the dog tucked its tail and bolted behind the building so fast its paws slipped on the gravel. That was the first odd thing. It was small enough that we forgot about it within an hour. We drove the south rim that evening. It was hot enough that the air coming in through the vents felt like it had passed over a stove, but once we got out at the overlooks, the wind helped. I had seen photos of Canyon de Chelly before, but standing above it was different. The walls dropped away hard, and the bottom looked greener than I expected, with cottonwoods and fields and thin roads cut into the sand. People were down there living their lives while tourists like us stood above them taking pictures. That made me feel strange in a way I didn't say out loud. It was beautiful, but it also felt private, not like a national park where everything seems arranged for visitors. It felt like we had been allowed to look at something that was not ours. Aaron did not have that feeling, or if he did, he ignored it. He was all over the place with his tripod. He photographed fence posts, rock formations, signs, the canyon floor, shadows on the walls, birds riding the air, Jenna looking over the rail, me standing awkwardly because I hate being photographed. At one overlook, an older Navajo man selling jewelry from a folding table watched Aaron for a long time. I noticed because the man was not watching the other tourists. He watched Aaron move closer and closer to the edge, crouching, standing, adjusting, taking shot after shot. Finally, he told Aaron not to climb over the rail. Aaron said he wasn't going to. The man said, "You already are in your head." That annoyed Aaron. I could see it. He gave one of those tight smiles and packed up his tripod. But as we walked back to the car, he muttered that people got weird around cameras. Jenna told him to drop it. He did, but only because the sunset was starting to go orange and pink across the canyon wall, and he wanted to shoot it from Spider Rock. We got there with maybe 20 minutes of light left. It was busy enough that nothing felt isolated. Families, couples, a few solo travelers. People were quiet, but in a normal way. Everyone was looking at the view. Spider Rock looked unreal in the evening light. Aaron was excited in a way that made him almost likable. He forgot to be sarcastic for a while. He set up away from the biggest group of people and started bracketing shots. Jenna and I leaned against the rail and watched the canyon change colors. The first time I heard her voice behind me, I thought she had stepped away without me noticing. "It was just my name," said softly, from the left side near the scrub beyond the parking area. I turned. Jenna was still beside me. She had her sunglasses on top of her head and both hands on the rail. She asked what was wrong, and I told her I thought she had said something. She shook her head. I looked over at Aaron. He was bent over the camera, scrolling through photos on the back screen. There were other people around, so it was easy to dismiss. Somebody's voice had carried. Somebody had a similar voice. Maybe I had imagined it. That is what I told myself, and I would tell myself that kind of thing a lot that week. We stayed until it was too dark for Aaron to keep working without getting cranky. On the way back to Chinlo, he wanted to stop twice along the road to shoot the last band of light behind the formations. I said no the first time because we were hungry. Jenna said no the second time because the road was dark and there were livestock signs everywhere. Aaron sat in the back and clicked through photos, and I remember seeing the glow of the camera screen on his face every few seconds. About halfway back, something ran alongside the car. I didn't see it clearly. That has always bothered me because if I had seen it clearly then, maybe I would have been harder to convince later that everything had a normal explanation. We were on a dark stretch of road, and I was driving maybe 45 because I was worried about animals. Jenna was in the passenger seat looking at her phone for dinner options. Aaron was behind her. Out of the corner of my left eye, I saw movement down near the shoulder, low, fast, keeping pace with the car. I turned my head and caught a shape in the sweep of the headlights as we went around a slight bend. It looked like a coyote at first, but too tall in the front. Then it was gone, and the shoulder was empty. I said something like, "Did you see that?" Jenna looked up too late. Aaron said he saw something but thought it was a dog. Nobody screamed. Nobody panicked. We were still in the part of the week where strange things were allowed to be normal things. I said it was probably a coyote. Jenna said there were probably tons of dogs out there. Aaron said he wished I had slowed down so he could get a picture. That bothered me a little, but not enough to start a fight. We ate at a fast food place in Chinle, went back to the motel, showered, and tried to sleep. The room smelled like old carpet and air conditioner dust. Jenna passed out almost immediately. I lay awake longer because the wall unit kept rattling. Around 1 a.m, I heard someone outside say Jenna's name. It was not loud. It was close though, right outside our door, or maybe a few feet beyond it. A man's voice, low, almost careful. "Jenna." I opened my eyes and stared into the dark room. The curtains were drawn, but a line of parking lot lights showed under them. I waited. I heard it again, a little farther away. "Jenna." She didn't wake up. I sat up slowly and looked at the bed beside me. She was on her stomach with one arm under her pillow. I didn't go outside. I need to say that because I am not brave in the way people in stories are brave. I sat there with my phone in my hand and listened. There were footsteps on the walkway, or what I thought were footsteps. A soft scrape, then a pause, then another scrape. They moved past our door toward Aaron's room. A few seconds later, something tapped once on his window. Aaron did not come out. I did not call him because I didn't want my phone ringing through the wall and waking Jenna up over what was probably some drunk guy. That was my thought. Some drunk guy had seen us come back and was being stupid. I waited until the noises stopped. Then I got up and looked through the peephole. The walkway was empty. The parking lot was empty except for our car, a white pickup, and a minivan. The brown dog from earlier was standing across the lot near the office, facing the rooms with its head lowered. I went back to bed and slept maybe 3 hours. Monday started normal enough that I almost didn't mention the voice. We got gas, bought waters and jerky, and drove back toward the monument. Aaron wanted sunrise shots, but none of us had gotten up early enough, so he was already irritated. Jenna noticed I was quiet and asked if I slept. I told her somebody had been outside calling her name. Aaron heard me from the back and said someone had tapped his window too. He had assumed it was me messing with him. He looked more annoyed than scared. Jenna didn't like it, but she went practical right away. She said it was probably another guest, and if it happened again, we should call the front desk. That day we drove the North Rim and stopped at the overlooks into Canyon del Muerto. Aaron took hundreds of photos. I know because he kept saying how many he had left on each card. There were fewer people than the evening before, and the heat felt heavier. The overlooks had signs, railings, dust, and that particular silence you get in places where sound drops away instead of echoing back. At one stop, Jenna stayed in the car with the AC running because she had a headache. Aaron and I walked out together. He moved ahead while I read one of the signs, and when I looked up, I saw him standing near the rail with his camera pointed not at the canyon, but at a thin line of brush to the right of the overlook. I asked what he was shooting. He said there was somebody down there. I looked and saw nothing but shrubs, rock, and shadow. He zoomed in on the camera screen and frowned. He said he had seen a person standing halfway behind a juniper, but they moved before he got focus. I told him hikers or locals were allowed to be around. He said this person wasn't hiking. He said they were just standing there with something over their shoulders, like a hide or blanket. He said the way they turned was weird, like they had been waiting for him to notice them. I told him heat shimmer does strange stuff. He looked at me like I was an idiot and took more pictures of the empty brush. At the next overlook, a family with 2 young kids arrived at the same time we did. One of the kids, a little boy maybe 5 or 6, refused to get out of their SUV. He cried hard enough that his mother got embarrassed and kept apologizing to everyone, even though no one cared. The boy kept pointing across the parking area toward a cluster of scrub trees. I couldn't hear everything he said, but I heard enough. He said there was a dog man. His dad got annoyed and told him there was no dog man. The boy yelled that it was smiling. That was when Jenna looked at me, and I knew she was thinking about the voice outside the room. Aaron wanted to go look. I told him no. Jenna told him absolutely not. He acted offended, like we were ruining some once-in-a-lifetime wildlife opportunity. The family left before we did, with the boy still crying in the back seat. Aaron waited until their SUV pulled away, then walked toward the scrub anyway. He only went 20 or 30 feet. There was nothing there. I could see that from where I stood, but when he came back, his face had changed. He said it smelled bad over there. Not dead animal exactly, more like wet fur and old meat left in a cooler. Jenna told him to stop talking about it because she already felt sick. We spent the afternoon in Chinle. It was too hot to keep moving around, and Jenna's headache got worse. Aaron downloaded photos to his laptop in his room while Jenna slept in ours. I walked to a nearby store for drinks and aspirin. On my way back, I saw the brown dog again. It was under a truck now, pressed flat against the dirt in the shade. Its eyes followed me. When I got closer to our building, it made a noise I had never heard from a dog. Not a bark, not a whine. More like it was trying not to cry. I looked where it was looking and saw Aaron standing outside his room with his camera in his hand. He was photographing the empty field behind the motel. I asked what he was doing. He said there had been a coyote at the edge of the lot. I looked out there and saw heat, weeds, a line of old fencing, and trash caught in the wire. No coyote. He showed me the camera screen. Most of the image was washed out from sun glare, but at the far edge, near a broken post, there was a dark shape. It could have been an animal. It could have been a garbage bag. Aaron zoomed in until it became blocks of pixels and said it was looking at him. That evening, Jenna wanted to stay close to the motel and get real sleep. Aaron acted like that was a waste of the trip, but she shut him down in the way only siblings can. We got dinner, watched some cable TV in our room, and tried to make it feel like any other vacation night. Around 10, Aaron knocked on the wall between our rooms to ask if we wanted ice. Jenna was half asleep and told him no. He went anyway. A minute later, we heard him say, "What the hell?" I opened our door. Aaron was standing near the ice machine, looking toward the far end of the walkway. The parking lot lights were bright enough near the rooms, but faded out toward the edge of the property. Beyond the pavement was a strip of gravel, then weeds and open dark. Something was standing at the edge of that dark. I saw it for maybe 2 seconds before it moved back. My brain sorted it as a person first because it was upright. Then it dropped lower, and I thought animal. Then it went sideways behind the cottonwood trunk in a way that did not match either one. Aaron lifted his camera. Jenna came out behind me and grabbed my arm. I told Aaron to get inside. He didn't move. The ice machine hummed. Somewhere down the row, a TV played too loud behind a closed door. Aaron took one step forward, and from the dark, in a voice that sounded close to Jenna's but not exactly right, something said, "Aaron, come here." Nobody moved after that. Jenna's grip on my arm got painful. Aaron lowered the camera. The voice came again, softer. Aaron. It had the rhythm of Jenna's voice, but it sounded like somebody playing a recording through a bad speaker. The vowels were stretched wrong. The breath was wrong. Even then, standing there with all the lights and cars and motel doors around us, I tried to make it normal. I thought maybe someone had overheard Jenna earlier. Maybe it was a woman out there. Maybe she needed help. Maybe this was the kind of misunderstanding that turns embarrassing once daylight hits it. Then the brown dog started barking from behind the office. It barked once, then again, then went into a full panic. The thing at the edge of the lot moved, not away. It moved forward one step, low to the ground now, and I saw the outline of a narrow head and shoulders that looked too high. Aaron finally backed up. We got into our rooms and locked the doors. We did call the front desk that time. The night clerk came out with a flashlight and walked the parking lot with another man I think worked maintenance. They found nothing. They told us coyotes came around sometimes. They said people also cut through the lot. They were polite, but I could tell they wanted us to stop making it their problem. I didn't blame them. If 3 tourists told me a thing in the dark had used one of their voices, I would not know what to do with that either. Aaron stayed in our room for about an hour after that. He sat in the chair by the window and kept looking at the photos on his camera. Jenna told him not to go outside alone again, and for once he didn't argue. He did show us one photo he had taken by the ice machine. It was blurry because he had raised the camera too fast, and the autofocus caught the cottonwood branches instead of the background. Still, between the branches and the darker stretch beyond the lot, there was something pale at about waist height. Not a face. Not clear enough for that. Just a pale oval shape with two darker marks where eyes might be if you wanted them to be eyes. I told him it was glare. Jenna told him to delete it. He didn't. He said it might be the best evidence of something he had ever taken. That was Aaron. That was the problem. Tuesday was the day we should have left. I know people always say that after bad things happen, but I mean it in a practical way. We had all slept badly. Jenna had a headache again. Aaron was restless and wired. I felt sick in my stomach, not like food poisoning. More like that heavy feeling you get when you know you are ignoring something obvious. We could have packed the car, eaten the cost of the room, and been back in Phoenix by evening. Instead, we decided to have a low-key day because leaving would have meant admitting we were scared of something we could not explain. We drove to the visitor center in the morning. Aaron asked about guided tours, but the times did not work for us, and Jenna seemed relieved. We looked at displays, bought postcards, and filled water bottles. I remember standing in the air conditioning and feeling safe in a way that made me realize I had not felt safe since the night before. There were normal people around, families asking questions, a ranger talking to visitors, a guy outside selling water from a cooler, sunlight everywhere. Near the parking lot, Jenna started talking to an older woman selling bracelets. I was a few feet away, pretending not to hover. Aaron wandered off with his camera. The woman asked where we were from. Jenna said Phoenix. The woman looked past her at Aaron and asked if he was with us. Jenna said yes, he was her brother. The woman said he should stop taking pictures of things that don't want him. She did not say it dramatically. She did not lean in or act like a movie fortune teller. She said it the same way someone might tell you your tire was low. Jenna went quiet. I stepped closer. The woman kept arranging bracelets on the cloth. She said some people come there and think everything is for them because they have a camera. She said sometimes people bring something back with them because they keep looking when they should look away. Jenna asked what she meant. The woman shook her head and said we should be careful after dark. That was all. She would not say more. Jenna bought a bracelet she did not want, and we left. Aaron rolled his eyes when Jenna told him. He said people love messing with tourists. I snapped at him a little then. I told him the kid yesterday had not been messing with us, and the voice outside the motel had not been a jewelry seller putting on a show. Aaron said he knew what we heard. He just didn't think pretending it was some curse would help. Jenna told him nobody said curse. He said we were all acting like we were in a bad internet story. That shut me up because a small part of me was afraid he was right. That afternoon we went back to the South Rim. Aaron wanted another attempt at Spider Rock in stronger light. I agreed because I thought the more normal the day stayed, the better we would all feel. We stopped at Segi Overlook first. There were a few cars, a couple eating sandwiches, an older man sitting alone in a folding chair under the open hatch of his SUV. He watched the canyon with binoculars. Everything looked ordinary. Then Aaron walked to the rail and froze. I saw it too this time. Across a shallow drop to the right, beyond the main viewing area, there was a narrow dirt path leading through scrub toward a rocky point. Standing on that point was a figure. Not close, maybe 80 or 90 yards. It was not behind a fence or hidden. It was just there. The body shape looked human. The posture did not. Its shoulders were hunched high, and something hung down from its back or arms in dark strips. It could have been a coat. It could have been a blanket. It could have been a person wearing a hide. The head looked wrong because it seemed too narrow at the bottom, like the jaw came to a point. I looked away first because I did not want to be staring if it was a person. When I looked back, it was still there, facing us. Aaron had his camera up. Jenna whispered his name in a tone that meant stop. He took 3 photos anyway. The figure did not run. It did not duck. It slowly lifted one arm, not waving, more like pointing at Aaron. The older man with binoculars stood up so fast his chair tipped over. He walked toward us, not running, but moving with purpose. He said, "Get in your car." Again, no drama, just an order. Jenna moved first. I grabbed Aaron's sleeve. He fought me for half a second because he wanted another shot. The older man repeated himself, louder. Aaron lowered the camera and we all went to the car. When I started the engine, Aaron said the figure was gone. I didn't look. I backed out and drove. Nobody spoke for several minutes. Then Jenna started crying quietly, which scared me more than if she had screamed. Aaron sat in the back seat breathing hard through his nose. I asked him if he got pictures. Jenna told me not to ask that. Aaron said yes. We did not go to Spider Rock. We went back to Chinle. At the motel, Aaron shut himself in his room with the laptop. Jenna and I argued in whispers in our room. She wanted to leave the next morning. I wanted to leave that night. She said driving tired on dark roads was stupid. I said staying was stupid. We went in circles. Under all of it was the fact that neither of us wanted to say the word we were both thinking. Jenna had grown up in Arizona around enough Navajo friends and coworkers to know people did not throw that word around for fun. She was not Navajo, and neither was I. We had no claim to it. We also had no better word for what was happening. Around 5, Aaron knocked on our door and came in without waiting. He looked pale. He set his laptop on the little table by the window and showed us the photos from Segi Overlook. The first one was blurry but clear enough to show a standing figure. The second was sharper. I wish I had never seen it. The thing was not close enough for real detail, but the body proportions were wrong. The legs looked thin and bent inward. The torso was wrapped in something dark and patchy. The head was turned toward the camera, and there were 2 pale spots where eyes would be. It could still have been a person in a costume. That was the awful part. It was close enough to human that your mind kept trying to put it into a human explanation, but every time you looked longer, the explanation got weaker. The third photo was the worst because it showed the figure with one arm lifted. At the end of the arm there was a hand. Not a paw, not a hoof, a hand. Long fingers. Too long maybe because of motion blur or heat shimmer, but fingers all the same. Jenna told Aaron to delete them. He refused. He said if something happened, those photos mattered. I told him something was already happening. He said deleting the photos would not make it stop. Jenna said maybe keeping them was why it had not stopped. Aaron laughed then, but there was no humor in it. He said we sounded insane. Then something tapped on his motel room window through the wall. We all heard it. 1 tap, pause. 2 taps. The wall between our rooms was thin enough that it came through clearly. Aaron stood there with his mouth open. His room was empty. He had left the curtains closed and the door locked. The tapping came again. 3 slow taps this time. Jenna told him not to go in there. He did anyway, but he let me come with him. We stepped outside onto the walkway and went 1 door over. It was still light, not full dark yet. The parking lot had guests moving around. A man was loading a cooler into his truck. A woman was smoking near the stairs. That made it feel ridiculous to be afraid. Aaron unlocked his door and we went in. The room was exactly how he had left it. His duffel open on the second bed. Camera battery chargers plugged in near the sink. Curtains closed. Bathroom light on. The window was in the front wall beside the door, facing the parking lot. There was no way to stand outside that window without being visible from the walkway. No one was there. Still, on the glass, there were 3 marks, not scratches, smears. They were low, about chest height for a crouching person, or head height for a large animal standing up. Each smear was curved and greasy looking, like someone had pressed dirty fingertips against the glass and dragged them down. Aaron took a picture. Jenna cursed at him from the doorway. He said he was documenting it. I told him to pack. We made the decision then. We would leave at first light Wednesday. We should have left that minute, but it is easy to say that now. At the time, everything was confusing and embarrassing. We had paid for the room. We were tired. The drive was long. Jenna did not want to be on unfamiliar roads after dark. Aaron insisted we should sleep, leave early, and not make emotional decisions. I did not like it, but I agreed because it sounded reasonable in the room, with the AC running and people walking past outside. That night, nobody slept much. Aaron stayed in our room again. He brought his camera bag and laptop with him. We pushed a chair in front of the door even though the lock worked fine. Jenna slept in short bursts. Aaron sat against the wall with a pillow behind his back, scrolling through photos, zooming in, making notes in a little app on his phone. I told him to stop looking at them. He said he couldn't. Around midnight, the power flickered once. The AC cut out. The room went silent, and in that 1 second of silence, we heard something moving outside the door. It was not walking like a person. That was the first time I really understood that. A person has rhythm, even when they try to be quiet. This was scrape, pause, scrape, a soft weight shifting close to the ground. It moved along the walkway, stopped outside our door, and sniffed. I know how that sounds. I am not using that word for effect. It sniffed along the bottom of the door, wet and loud enough that Jenna covered her mouth. Aaron had the camera in his lap, but he did not lift it. None of us moved. Then it spoke in my voice. It said, "Open it." Not loud. Not perfect either. It sounded like me after a bad cold. The words were clear, but the tone was flat, like a recording of me had been cut out of another sentence and placed there. Jenna made a small noise. Aaron looked at me as if I had done it somehow. The voice said it again. "Open it." I had never been that scared in my life. I had been startled before. I had been nervous before. I had been in a car accident when I was 19 and thought I was about to die for maybe half a second. This was different. This was slow. My body wanted to move and could not pick a direction. My mouth dried out. My arms felt weak. The thing stayed outside the door for maybe a minute, maybe 5. Time got strange. Then it scraped away down the walkway. We waited until dawn with the lights on. Wednesday morning should have been the end of it. We packed fast. Aaron looked awful. Jenna looked worse. The sky was barely light when we carried everything to the car. The motel parking lot was empty except for a couple work trucks and the minivan from earlier in the week. The brown dog was nowhere around. I checked under the car like a paranoid idiot. Nothing. We loaded our bags. Aaron put his camera case in the back seat instead of the trunk because he did not want it bouncing around. That detail matters. I went to the office to check out. Jenna came with me because she didn't want to stand alone by the car. Aaron stayed near the vehicle, smoking even though he had told us he quit months before. The clerk was not the same woman from Sunday. He took the key cards and asked if everything had been okay. I started to say yes because that is what people say, but Jenna told him someone had been around the rooms at night. He looked at us for a long second. Then he looked past us through the office window toward the car, where Aaron stood with his back to us. The clerk said, "You're leaving now?" Jenna said yes. He said, "Good." He would not explain. I asked if other guests had complained. He shrugged and said dogs had been acting up. That was all he would give us. We walked back out, annoyed and scared and ready to be gone. Aaron was not by the car. His cigarette was on the pavement near the driver's side rear tire, still smoking. The back door was open. His camera case was gone. For about 5 seconds, nobody understood what we were seeing. Then Jenna called his name. No answer. I looked around the lot. Nothing. I looked toward the field behind the motel, and there he was, about 100 yards away, walking along the fence line, with his camera case in his hand. I have no good explanation for why he did that. He gave us one later, but it never made sense to me. He said he saw someone carrying his camera bag into the field, so he followed. But we saw his camera case in his hand. I know we did. Jenna knows too. He said no, he had chased the person, grabbed it back, and the person ran. But he was calm when we first saw him. Not running, not looking around. He was walking like someone had called him over and he was listening. I yelled at him. He did not turn. Jenna started toward him, but I grabbed her wrist because everything in me said not to leave the pavement. She screamed his name then, and that got him. He stopped. He looked back at us. Even from that distance, I could see confusion hit him. He looked at the case in his hand like he had forgotten he was holding it. Then he started walking back fast. Behind him, something moved along the fence. It was low and pale and quick, not chasing him exactly, keeping near him, using the weeds and broken posts as cover. I saw a narrow back, a flash of gray hide or skin, then nothing. Aaron did not see it. He kept coming toward us. I ran then. I don't remember deciding to. I ran across the gravel and weeds toward him. Jenna yelled behind me. The thing by the fence moved again, faster this time. Aaron saw my face and finally turned. He screamed in a way I had never heard from him. Not a word, just one hard sound. I was maybe 30 yards away when he fell. It did not tackle him like a person would. It came from the side, low, and hit his legs first. Aaron went down on his shoulder. The camera case flew open, and gear spilled across the dirt. I saw a lens roll into the weeds. I saw Aaron kick backward. I saw a hand close around his ankle. A hand. That is the part I will not soften. The fingers were long and dark at the tips. They wrapped around his ankle above the shoe and dragged him half a body length before he grabbed a fence post. I saw the thing then, more clearly than I wanted. It was not huge. That almost made it worse. It was maybe the size of a thin person but folded wrong, with its knees out and shoulders high. There was hair or hide hanging off it in patches. Its head was narrow and low, and the mouth looked too wide because it was open. I did not see a clean face. I saw teeth, wet gums, and eyes that reflected the morning light in a flat white way. I picked up a rock without thinking and threw it as hard as I could. I missed. I screamed at it. Jenna was screaming too. The clerk came out of the office yelling. A truck door slammed somewhere behind us. The thing let go of Aaron's ankle and snapped its head toward me. The way it moved was awful, too fast at the neck. For 1 second it looked right at me, and I had the feeling that it knew me, not recognized me, knew me, like it had listened through the motel door long enough to understand which one of us would run, which one would freeze, and which one would keep taking pictures. Aaron crawled backward. The thing lunged again and got him by the upper arm. He had been wearing a thin, long-sleeve sunshirt. It ripped open immediately. He punched at it with his free hand. It bit into the meat of his shoulder and his scream changed. That sound is still the worst sound I have ever heard. The clerk had a tire iron. I don't know where he got it. He ran past me and hit the fence post, not the thing. Maybe because he couldn't reach it, or because he didn't want to get close. The metal clang made the thing flinch. I got to Aaron and grabbed the back of his shirt. Jenna got there too, crying and cursing. We pulled. The thing held on for one more second. I saw skin stretch at Aaron's shoulder. Then the clerk hit the fence post again and yelled something in Navajo that I did not understand. The thing released him and dropped backward into the weeds. It did not run away like an animal. It moved backward while facing us, low to the ground, then slid through a gap in the fence and vanished behind a line of brush. The weeds barely moved after it passed. Aaron was bleeding badly. His shoulder was torn open in a crescent shape, and his forearm had deep cuts like something had raked through it. His ankle was already swelling. Jenna took off her overshirt and pressed it against his shoulder. I called 911 and could barely talk. The clerk kept standing between us and the fence with the tire iron in his hand. A couple from the minivan came out, saw the blood, and went right back inside. I don't blame them. I would have done the same if it wasn't my family on the ground. The ambulance came fast, or maybe time jumped. I remember Aaron lying on the gravel, shaking and asking where his camera was. Jenna told him to shut up. His face was gray. He kept saying it used her voice. Then he said it used mine too. He said he had heard me calling him from the field while we were checking out. He thought I found something by the fence and wanted his camera. That was why he walked out there. He said he saw me standing near the broken post, waving him over. When he got closer, the person turned sideways, and he saw it was not me. Then it dropped down. The EMT asked what attacked him. I said I didn't know. The clerk said dog. I looked at him when he said it, and he stared straight back at me with a look that told me to shut up. So I did. Dog became the word we used. Dog was easier. Dog got Aaron into the ambulance without questions none of us could answer. At the hospital in Chinle, the official version became probable feral dog or coyote attack. A coyote attack in broad daylight on an adult man near a motel did not make much sense, but it made more sense than the truth. Aaron got stitches in his forearm and shoulder. The bite was ugly, deep in one place and torn in another. They cleaned it, gave him antibiotics, started rabies shots, and wrapped his ankle. No major artery was hit, no tendons severed. His collarbone was bruised but not broken. By every normal measurement, he was lucky. He did not act lucky. He lay there staring at the ceiling, and every time someone walked past the room, he flinched. Jenna sat beside him and held his good hand. I filled out paperwork and talked to a police officer who clearly did not believe much beyond animal attack. He was not rude. He had probably heard every tourist panic story there was. He asked if we had been drinking. We had not. He asked if Aaron had tried to feed or approach an animal. Aaron said no. He asked if anyone had photos. Aaron closed his eyes. I said the camera had been dropped in the field. That was true. The officer said they would send someone by the motel area if they could. His tone told me not to expect much. Again, I don't blame him. There are real problems in the world. A tourist saying a coyote with hands attacked his girlfriend's brother is not something any normal person can file cleanly. We stayed at the hospital most of Wednesday. The staff was kind. They were busy, but kind. Jenna called her parents and told them Aaron had been bitten by an animal. Her mother cried. Her father got angry in the helpless way fathers get angry when they are too far away to fix anything. He wanted us to come home immediately. So did we. The problem was, Aaron's camera gear was still out there, and Aaron would not leave without it. That sounds insane. It was insane. He had just been attacked. He had stitches and a bandaged shoulder and a swollen ankle, and still he kept saying he needed the camera body and memory cards. Jenna told him insurance could replace gear. He said insurance could not replace what was on the cards. I told him the cards were the reason this happened. He looked at me then with a hatred I had never seen in him. Not because he hated me, I think, but because he knew I was right and could not stand it. We compromised in the worst possible way. I would go back to the motel with Jenna after Aaron was discharged, get our car, get any gear we could safely grab from the edge of the field if it was still there, and then we would leave. Aaron was not supposed to come. He insisted. The nurse told him to rest. Jenna told him no. He said if we left the camera, he would call the motel himself and pay someone to get it. He said he could walk. In the end, he came because he was an adult, and because none of us had the energy to physically stop him. We got back to the motel late Wednesday afternoon. The clerk from that morning was gone. The woman from check-in was there. She looked at Aaron's bandages and did not ask what happened. Our rooms had not been cleaned yet because we had checked out and then everything had gone sideways. She gave us 10 minutes to collect anything left behind. She also told us not to go into the field. I asked if anyone had found a camera. She said no. The field behind the motel looked harmless in the sun. That was one of the cruel things about the whole week. Daylight kept making us feel stupid. The broken fence was just old wire and leaning posts. The weeds were dry and knee-high in places. Beyond that was open land, scattered trash, scrub, and a line of low rises in the distance. The place where Aaron had gone down was easy to see because the dirt was scuffed and dark in spots. Blood dries fast in that heat, but not so fast that you can pretend it was never there. We did not go far. I held Aaron by the back of his shirt like he was a child. Jenna carried a can of wasp spray from the car, which seems ridiculous, but felt better than nothing. We found the camera case first. It was torn along one side. One lens was cracked. A filter pouch had been shredded. Batteries were scattered around. The camera body was lying face down near a clump of weeds about 10 feet from the fence. Aaron made a broken sound when he saw it. I picked it up, not him. The screen was cracked, but the memory card door was closed. There were tracks in the dirt around it. Some were ours from that morning. Some were Aaron's shoe prints. Some looked like dog or coyote tracks, but long, stretched out. Some looked like bare human feet, except the toes were too far apart and pressed too deep. I did not take pictures. Aaron begged me to. I said no. Jenna kept looking at the fence gap where the thing had gone through. Her face had gone blank in a way I had never seen before. As I put the camera body into the torn case, something clicked from inside it. Not a sound from the camera, from the weeds. One click, then another, like someone pressing their tongue against the roof of their mouth. Jenna heard it too. She said my name once, very quietly. Aaron tried to turn his head. I pulled him back toward the car. The clicking followed us for maybe 10 steps, staying in the weeds beyond the fence. It was not loud. It did not need to be. When we reached the pavement, it stopped. We left Chinle before sunset. I wish I could say that was the end of the bad part, but it wasn't. The thing followed us out, or something did. Maybe it had already gotten what it wanted. Maybe it was making sure. Maybe it was attached to the camera, the photos, Aaron, or all of us. I don't know. What I do know is that the drive out of Chinle felt wrong from the first mile. Jenna drove because I was shaking too hard and Aaron was medicated. He sat in the back with his injured arm strapped across his chest, the torn camera case on the seat beside him like an animal he was afraid to touch. The plan was to get to Gallup or maybe farther if we felt okay, stop somewhere populated and drive the rest in the morning. We did not want to be on smaller roads at night, but we had already lost so much time that darkness caught us anyway. For the first hour, nobody talked. The car smelled like hospital disinfectant, dust, and Aaron's dried blood. Jenna kept both hands on the wheel. I watched the mirrors. Every pair of headlights behind us made my chest tighten. Aaron breathed through his mouth and occasionally whispered something to himself. I thought he was praying at first. Later, I realized he was repeating the names of his camera files, trying to remember what he had shot and in what order. Somewhere past a long, empty stretch, we saw a dog in the road. Jenna slowed before I could tell her not to. It stood in our lane facing us, maybe 50 yards ahead. In the headlights, it looked black or dark gray, thin, with a low head and big ears. A normal dog shape at first. Then it turned sideways, and its front legs looked too long. Jenna stopped the car. I told her to go around. She whispered that she didn't want to hit it. Aaron sat up behind us and said, "That's not a dog." The animal walked toward us, slow, straight down the center of the lane. Its eyes reflected green-white in the headlights. Jenna put the car in reverse, but before she moved, a pickup came over the rise behind us. Its headlights filled the rearview mirror. The dog shape stopped, stepped off the road, and disappeared into the dark so quickly it was like it had dropped through a hole. The pickup passed us, horn blaring, the driver probably furious that we were stopped in the road. Jenna started driving again, crying silently. A few minutes later, Aaron's phone rang. His phone was in the cup holder because Jenna had taken it from him at the hospital, so he would stop checking the camera app. The screen showed my name. My phone was in my hand. I looked at the screen, then at Jenna. She saw it too. Aaron reached forward with his good hand, but I grabbed the phone first and let it ring. It rang until it stopped. Then it rang again. My name on his screen. My phone silent in my hand. I powered Aaron's phone off. 10 seconds later, mine rang. The caller ID said Aaron. Aaron was sitting behind me, staring at my phone with his face white in the dashboard glow. I did not answer. The ringing stopped. Then Jenna's phone rang. Same thing. Aaron's name. She started saying no over and over under her breath. I took her phone and powered it off too. Mine kept lighting up in my hand even after I silenced it. Aaron, Aaron, Aaron. Then Jenna. Then my own number. Then unknown. We were in a dead-looking stretch of road with no houses visible, and all three of us watching our phones behave like toys in someone else's hands. I turned mine off and held the power button down until the screen went black. The car felt better without the ringing. Not safe, but better. We made it to a gas station outside a small town. I am not going to name it because the people there did nothing wrong, and I don't want this tied to them. It had bright pumps, a convenience store, 2 semis parked along the side, and a tired cashier who looked like he had seen every kind of bad traveler. We pulled in under the lights and just sat there for a minute. Jenna's hands were cramped around the wheel. Aaron said he needed the bathroom. I told him to wait. He said he was going to throw up, so we all went in together. Inside, under fluorescent lights, the whole thing felt impossible again. There were chips, coffee machines, sunglasses on a rack, a freezer full of ice cream bars, a local radio station playing quietly, and a man buying lottery tickets. Aaron looked like a crime scene with his bandages and torn expression, but nobody stared too long. Jenna washed her face in the bathroom. I bought water, Gatorade, pain reliever we probably weren't supposed to mix with whatever they had given Aaron, and the largest flashlight they sold. Aaron sat at a little table near the window and held his injured arm. An older man came in while we were there. He wore dusty jeans, a long-sleeve shirt despite the heat, and a baseball cap with a feed store logo. He was Navajo, maybe in his 60s, maybe older. He looked at Aaron, then at Jenna, then at me. Not curious. More like he recognized the shape of our problem. He bought coffee and stood near the counter for a while. When he passed our table, he stopped and looked at the torn camera case. He said, "You came from Chinla." I said yes. He looked at Aaron's bandaged shoulder. "Dog?" None of us answered fast enough. He nodded once, like that confirmed something. Then he said, "Don't keep what it wanted you to keep." Aaron's eyes filled with tears immediately. I don't think he could help it. Jenna asked what he meant. The man looked toward the windows, out at the pumps and the dark beyond them. He said cameras make people foolish because they think taking a picture is the same as understanding something. He said there are things out there that do not like being looked at, and things that like it too much. He said either way, you don't bring them home. Aaron said it followed us. The man looked at him for a long time. "Maybe you carried it." That was all he said at first. He did not use the word. He did not give us a speech. He did not tell us a legend. He just stood there with his coffee cooling in one hand and told Aaron to remove the memory cards, break them, and leave the pieces in separate trash cans before we drove any farther. Aaron shook his head like a kid. Jenna told him to do it. I told him too. He said those photos were the only proof he wasn't crazy. The older man said proof would not help him if it kept calling his name. That sentence finally got through. We went back to the car under the gas station lights. I opened the torn camera case on the hood. Aaron's hands shook too badly to do it, so I removed the card from the camera body. There were 2 more cards in a plastic case, one in a little wallet, and one in the laptop bag from uploads he had done earlier in the week. Aaron said the laptop had copies. Jenna said we would deal with that too. The older man stood near his truck at the next pump, watching but not coming closer. I snapped the first SD card in half. It was harder than I expected. Those things bend before they break. Aaron made a noise like I had hurt him. I snapped the second. Jenna crushed the third under the heel of her shoe. The fourth cracked but did not break all the way, so I bent it back and forth until the plastic split. We put some pieces in the gas station trash, some in the bathroom trash, some in the bin by the pumps. Then we opened Aaron's laptop. The copies were there in a folder named CDL for Canyon de Celli. Subfolders by date. Aaron was crying by then, not loudly. Just tears running down his face while he watched Jenna move the folders to the trash. She emptied it. I know enough about computers to know that does not truly destroy everything. At the time, it was what we could do. Aaron said there were cloud backups. His camera app had uploaded low-resolution previews when it had signal at the motel. Jenna told him to log in. He said he couldn't remember the password. I could see the panic building again. The older man walked over then and said we should turn the laptop off, put it in the trunk, and not open it again until we were home and in daylight. He said the road would be easier after the cards were gone. I asked if he thought it would stop. He said, "I think you should stop feeding it." That was the closest he came to explaining anything. We thanked him. It felt stupid to say thank you for something like that, but there was nothing else. He told us to drive where there were lights, stop if we needed to, and not answer any voice that came from outside the car. Then he got in his truck and left. No mysterious disappearance, no final warning. He just drove away like a normal man who had done what he could and wanted no more part of our trouble. The drive after that was different, not safe. I don't want to make it sound clean, but the pressure changed. The phone stayed off. We still saw movement twice along the shoulder, both times far enough away that it could have been livestock or dogs. Once, near a dark stretch between towns, something hit the rear passenger window with a flat slap so hard Aaron screamed. Jenna almost swerved. There was no crack in the glass, only a smear like dust mixed with grease. We did not stop. Another time, I heard my mother's voice from outside the car. My mother lives in Oregon and had no idea where we were. It said my childhood nickname once, from somewhere out in the dark beyond Jenna's window. I did not tell them until later, because I did not want Jenna to panic. We reached Gallup after midnight and got a room at a chain hotel with interior hallways. That was non-negotiable. I parked under lights near the entrance. We carried only what we needed inside. Aaron wanted the camera case. Jenna told him no. He did not fight her. That scared me too. Aaron always fought. He had been reduced to someone who could be led by the elbow. In the hotel room, Jenna cleaned the smear off the car window with napkins and bottled water because she did not want to see it in the morning. I checked the hallway 3 times before bed. Aaron lay on the pull-out sofa and stared at the ceiling. He had a fever, probably from stress and the injury, and he kept drifting in and out. Around 3 in the morning, he sat up and said someone was in the room. There wasn't. He said it was standing in the corner by the desk. Jenna turned on every light. The corner was empty. Aaron said it had been wearing my face. We did not sleep after that. Thursday morning, his shoulder looked angry and swollen, so we went to an urgent care in Gallup before continuing. They checked the wound, marked the redness, gave more instructions, and told us to keep a close eye on infection. Again, the word was animal. Animal bite, animal attack, animal exposure. I filled out forms and felt like I was committing a small crime every time I wrote it. Aaron barely spoke. Jenna did all the talking because I had started to feel detached from everything, like I was watching our lives through thick glass. We drove south and west in daylight. The desert looked normal. That almost made me angry. Cars passed. People pulled trailers. Families stopped for gas. A woman in Holbrook complained loudly about the price of iced coffee while I stood in line buying bandages. I wanted to ask her if she knew how lucky she was to be upset about coffee. I didn't. I just paid and went back to the car. Nothing followed us in daylight that we could see. No voices, no phone calls because we kept the phones off unless we were inside a public place. No animal in the road. Aaron slept for long stretches. Jenna and I traded driving. We got back to Phoenix late Thursday afternoon instead of Saturday like we had planned. The heat there felt different, familiar, city heat, asphalt, traffic, stucco walls, pool chlorine from neighbors' yards. I had never been so relieved to see ugly apartment landscaping in my life. We took Aaron to Jenna's parents' house because they wanted eyes on him. Her father met us in the driveway, ready to be angry at somebody, and then he saw Aaron's face and just hugged him carefully. Jenna's mother cried in the doorway. We told them the official version first. Wild dog or coyote, attack behind the motel, hospital, rabies shots, antibiotics. They knew we were leaving things out. Parents can tell. That night, after Aaron fell asleep in the guest room, we told them enough of the truth that Jenna's mother crossed herself even though she was not very religious, and her father sat in silence for almost 10 minutes. He was the one who destroyed the laptop. Not dramatically. He did not smash it in the driveway or burn it in a barrel. He said if there were cloud backups, opening the computer might sync something, or save something, or make things worse. He was an accountant, not a tech guy, but fear makes people practical in strange ways. He removed the hard drive after watching a video on his own computer, put it in a metal toolbox, and took it to an electronics recycling place the next morning. Aaron protested weakly, but by then he did not have the strength to fight a whole room of people. For 2 days, nothing happened. Friday passed in a blur of wound care, phone calls, insurance calls, and Jenna and me trying to figure out how to return to our normal apartment when normal no longer felt real. Aaron's fever went down. The redness around the bite stopped spreading. He ate soup. He even laughed once at something stupid on TV, then looked guilty afterward, like laughing meant he was saying it was over. We kept the blinds closed after dark. Jenna's parents' dog, a fat old yellow lab named Rosie, refused to go into the guest room where Aaron slept. She would stand at the doorway and whine, but she did not growl. That felt like an improvement over the brown dog at the motel, though I don't know why. Saturday morning, Aaron asked for his phone. Jenna said no at first. He said he needed to call his boss and explain he would not be back Monday. That was reasonable. We had kept his phone off since the road. I turned it on in the kitchen with everyone around. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then notifications came in all at once. Texts, missed calls, voicemails, app alerts, Aaron's camera app, cloud backup failed, cloud backup complete, preview upload complete. My stomach dropped. Aaron started shaking. Jenna took the phone from me. The app had uploaded 37 low-resolution previews from the motel Wi-Fi before we destroyed the cards. Most were harmless. Canyon walls, overlooks. Jenna by the rail, me looking annoyed. The parking lot, the field, the figure at Segi, the blurry pale oval near the motel Cottonwood, the lifted arm, the hand. Jenna deleted the app. Aaron said that wasn't enough. I knew it wasn't. We needed the account. He remembered the password on the third try. We logged in from Jenna's father's computer, not Aaron's phone, and found the cloud library. There they were. Not full files, but enough. 37 little images sitting in a clean grid like vacation memories. The final uploaded image had been taken after Aaron walked into the field Wednesday morning. None of us remembered him taking it. Maybe he did before he dropped the camera. Maybe the shutter fired when it hit the ground. The image was tilted. Most of it showed dirt and weeds. In the upper corner, blurred by motion, was Aaron's leg and the broken fence. Behind the fence, crouched low, was the thing. It was closer than we had realized. It had been within a few feet of him before it attacked. The face was still not clear, and I am grateful for that. But one detail was clear. Around its shoulders was something that looked like a hide, and caught in it were strips of fabric. One strip was blue and white plaid. I recognized it because I had seen a piece of the same fabric tied to a fence post at one of the overlooks 2 days earlier, fluttering in the wind. Aaron had photographed it because he liked the color against the rock. He had noticed it. He had taken it. Not physically, not with his hand, but he had taken it into the camera and kept it. That was when Aaron finally understood. He did not argue when Jenna deleted the cloud library. He did not argue when her father closed the account entirely. He did not argue when we took his phone to a repair shop and had it wiped. He sat at the kitchen table with his bandaged arm and cried with his whole face turned down toward the wood, quietly, like he did not want to bother anyone with it. I felt bad for him then, in a way I had not during the worst of it. He had been arrogant and stupid, yes, but he had not deserved to be hunted for it. Nobody deserves that. The last thing happened that night. Jenna and I were still at her parents' house because none of us wanted to split up yet. Aaron was asleep in the guest room. Her parents were in their room. I was on the couch in the living room, awake because every time I closed my eyes, I saw the thing pulling Aaron by the ankle. Around 2 a.m, Rosie the lab lifted her head from the rug and looked toward the front door. She did not growl. She just stared. Then someone knocked. 3 taps. Slow. I sat up. The porch light was on. The blinds were closed over the narrow windows beside the door. I did not move at first. The knock came again. 3 taps. From the hallway, Jenna whispered my name. She had heard it too. Her father came out of the bedroom holding a baseball bat. He looked half asleep and fully terrified. From outside, in Aaron's voice, someone said, "I need my camera." Aaron was asleep down the hall. I could hear him breathing through the baby monitor Jenna's mother had put in the room because she was worried about his fever. His real breathing was rough and uneven. The voice outside was clear, strong, patient. Jenna's father walked to the door, but he did not open it. He stood there with the bat hanging at his side and said nothing. The porch light flickered once. Rosie backed into the hallway, whining. The voice came again, still Aaron, but flatter now. "I need my camera." Then Jenna did something I did not expect. She walked into the kitchen, took the torn camera case from the counter where we had stupidly left it, and carried it to the fireplace. Her hands were steady. She opened the flue, shoved the empty case in, added the broken strap, the cracked plastic camera cover, the little lens cloths, and everything else we had brought back from Chinley except the medical papers. Her father helped once he understood. He used a long lighter. The case smoked first, then caught. The smell was awful, burned plastic and fabric, but none of us cared. The knocking stopped. We listened for another hour. Nothing else came. No footsteps, no voices, no scrape along the door. At dawn, Jenna's father opened the front door while I stood behind him with the bat. There was nothing on the porch, no tracks on the concrete, no dead animal, no symbol, no final horror movie sign, just the quiet street, early sun, and a garbage truck groaning somewhere a few blocks away. The normal world had come back. It did not happen again after that. Aaron recovered physically. The scars on his shoulder are thick and uneven, and he still does not have full strength in that arm. The bite healed badly because of how ragged it was. He finished the rabies shots. He went to therapy for a while, though he called it sleep counseling because he hated the idea of needing help. He sold what camera equipment he still had at home and never replaced it. For almost a year, he would not let anyone take his picture, not even at birthdays, not even casually. He said he did not like the feeling of being kept somewhere he could not leave. Jenna and I stayed together another year after that, but the trip changed us. Not in a dramatic movie way where we broke up because of trauma, more like we both became versions of ourselves that did not fit together as easily. We were careful with each other, and that kind of careful can turn into distance. We are not together now. We are on decent terms. Every July, one of us texts the other something boring, like, "Hope you're doing okay," and the other answers something boring back. Neither of us mentions Canyon de Chelly. I have been asked why I kept the hospital bracelet and the police card if I believe keeping things was part of the problem. The honest answer is that I don't know. Maybe because they are not images. Maybe because they prove the human part of what happened. Aaron was hurt. We went to a real hospital. A real person wrote down his name. Real stitches went into real skin. That matters to me because the rest has a way of becoming unreal if I don't hold on to something plain. I did not keep any photos. I did not keep the motel receipt. I did not keep the map Aaron had marked up with overlook times. I do not look up pictures from that canyon. And when I see travel videos from there, I scroll past. I am not saying nobody should go. People live there. People visit every day and come home fine. The place itself is not evil. That is not what I believe. What I believe is that we went there careless. Aaron especially, but all of us in our own ways. We acted like being allowed to stand somewhere meant we were allowed to take whatever we wanted from it. The thing that followed us did not come out of nowhere. It noticed us because Aaron noticed it first, and then he kept noticing. He pointed a camera at it. He tried to turn fear into evidence. He thought proof would protect him. It didn't. It gave the thing a path. That is the part I think about most. Not the attack, even though I still see it sometimes when I'm half asleep. Not the voice outside the motel room, even though I remember exactly how wrong my own voice sounded coming through that door. I think about Aaron standing at the overlook with the camera pressed to his face, while that figure raised one long arm and pointed back at him. At the time, I thought it was warning us away. Now I think it was choosing who to follow. We got home because people helped us. The motel clerk with the tire iron. The nurses, the older man at the gas station, Jenna's father, who destroyed a laptop without needing the whole story to make sense. That is the only clean ending I can give. We were stupid, we were scared, Aaron was hurt, and then we listened before it got worse. We destroyed what it wanted. We stopped answering. We stopped looking. After that, it stopped coming. I have not been back to Chinle. I do not plan to go back. If I ever have to pass near that part of Arizona again, I will keep driving in daylight, with my phone off and my eyes on the road. And if I hear someone I love calling from outside in the dark, I don't care how close they sound or how much they need help. I am not opening the door. The job came through a guy I'd worked construction with a couple summers before, a guy named Trent. He texted me out of nowhere one evening in late June, asking if I wanted to make some cash helping his uncle move cattle on a grazing lease up near Moab. I was between things at the time. The construction work had dried up that spring, and I'd been picking up shifts unloading trucks at a distribution center, which paid garbage. And I was 2 months behind on rent, and starting to get the kind of letters from my landlord that have a tone to them. So when Trent floated a number for 1 week of work, and it was more than I'd clear in 3 weeks of unloading trucks, I said yes, before I'd really thought it through. I didn't ask many questions. That's worth saying up front. I didn't ask many questions because I didn't want to give him a reason to give the job to somebody else. His uncle's name was Dell. I met him at a diner off the highway south of Moab the morning we were set to head out. He was somewhere in his 60s, built big through the shoulders and the chest the way older ranchmen get, thick hands, and a face that had spent about 50 years out in the sun and looked like it. He didn't waste words. He bought me a plate of eggs and asked me a few things about whether I'd been around livestock, whether I could ride, whether I could handle a week of hard days with no days off in the middle. And he watched my face the whole time I answered like he was less interested in the words than in whether I was lying. At the end of it, he nodded once and said, "All right, follow my truck. We'll be on the allotment in about an hour and a half." Then he looked at me for a second longer than felt normal, like he'd decided something and wasn't going to say what it was. And he got up and paid, and we went out to the trucks. Trent's other nephew was named Caleb, and he was the third of us. Trent himself wasn't coming, it turned out. He'd just been the connection. Caleb rode up with Dell in Dell's truck, and I followed behind in my own truck, because I'd told them I might need to peel off a day early depending on how some other stuff in my life shook out. And Dell had said that was fine. Just bring my own rig then so I wasn't stranding anybody. So it was a little 2-truck convoy heading north out of Moab that morning. And I remember it being one of those mornings where the country looks almost too good to be real. The red rock and the green river bottom and the La Salle Mountains standing up off to the east, with snow still sitting on the highest peaks, even though it was the first week of July and already hot down low. We drove north out of town and then turned off the highway onto a county road, gravel and washboard, and we ran along that for a good while. And then we turned off the county road onto BLM land, and the road got worse, just 2 ruts in the dirt winding through the rock and the brush. And we climbed up out of the river country onto the high desert, that big open rolling sagebrush land that sits at the foot of the La Salles. And that's where the allotment was. I didn't understand at first how big it was. I'd never been around grazing leases, and I didn't have a sense of the scale of them. Dell ran a few hundred head of cattle across what he told me was a little over 9,000 acres of public land. The whole point of the week was that the lower part of the allotment, the part closest to where we came in, was already grazed down and burned up, the grass gone brown and short, and the better grass and the better water were up higher and farther back toward the mountains. So the work of the week was to gather the herd off the low ground and push it up, tank to tank, until we had them on the good feed for the rest of the summer. He had 3 stock tanks spread across the allotment. They were big steel rings, maybe 10, 12 feet across, sunk partway into the ground, fed by a well through buried pipe with a float valve in each one to keep them topped off. The lowest tank was near where we'd make our first camp. The middle tank was a few miles up. The top tank was up against the back fence line, close to where the allotment butted up against the high country. We made the first camp that afternoon near the lowest tank. Del and Caleb had clearly done this many times together, and they had the whole thing put together fast and efficient. It was a wall tent, the old canvas kind, big enough to stand up in down the center, with 3 cots in it and a little folding table, and a propane 2-burner stove for cooking, and a couple of lanterns, the propane kind that hang from the ridgepole. We had a big cooler for the perishable food and dry goods in plastic totes and water in jugs, because you don't drink out of a stock tank. And we had the 3 horses on a picket line strung between the truck and a juniper, 1 horse apiece. Del spent some time that first evening watching me ride around the flat near camp, making sure I could actually sit a horse and neck rein and wasn't going to get hurt or get somebody else hurt. I could ride. I'd grown up around horses. My grandfather had kept a few, and even though I hadn't been on one in 3 or 4 years, it came back fast. And after about 20 minutes, Del seemed satisfied and told me to put my horse up. That first night was completely normal. I keep coming back to that, because of everything that came after. The first night was just 3 guys camped out in beautiful country at the start of a hard job. We cooked dinner on the 2-burner, some kind of skillet thing with ground beef and beans and a can of green chilies, and we ate it sitting on overturned buckets and camp chairs as the sun went down, and the light on the La Salles turned that deep gold and then pink, and then the mountains went dark blue against the sky. Del told a couple stories about cattle he'd lost over his career, one bunch to a lightning strike that killed 9 head at once where they'd crowded under a lone tree, and a few over the years to ravines and bog holes, and one time, a steer to a guy who'd cut his fence to poach it. Caleb was easy company. He was maybe 24, 25, quick to laugh, the kind of guy who keeps a conversation going without it being annoying, and he gave his uncle a hard time in the way you can tell 2 people have a good thing between them. We turned in early because we'd be up before light, and I slept hard that first night. No dreams I remembered, nothing. Just down and then morning. The first full day of work was the hardest physical day I'd had in a long time, and I'd been doing manual labor my whole life. We were up and riding before the sun was over the horizon, and we spent the whole morning gathering the cattle scattered across the low ground and pushing them, a few at a time, getting them bunched and moving them up toward the middle tank. It's slow work and it's hot work. Cattle don't want to leave where they are, especially in heat. And they peel off, and you have to ride out and bring them back, and the dust comes up off the dry ground and gets in your eyes and your teeth. And by 10 in the morning, the rock and the dirt were throwing heat back up at you like a stovetop, and the horses were lathered, and we were all soaked through our shirts. We got them bunched near the middle tank by the middle of the afternoon, and rode the few miles back down to camp, and by the time I got off my horse, I was wrecked in the good way. The way where every part of your body aches, but your head feels scrubbed clean and empty. And a beer out of the cooler tasted like the best thing I'd ever had. There was one small thing that second day that I didn't think anything of at the time and only went back to later. We'd been moving a bunch up a long, shallow draw in the early afternoon, and we passed a spot where there was an old juniper that had died and gone gray, a big one, and somebody had stacked rocks at the base of it. Not a cairn the way hikers stack them, not a little marker. It was a ring of rocks laid out around the trunk, fist-sized and bigger, placed there on purpose, old. The rocks gone dark and set into the dirt like they'd been there years. I asked Del about it as we rode past, said something like, "Somebody marking a corner out here, a survey thing." He looked at it, and he didn't answer me for long enough that I thought he hadn't heard, and then he said, "No. That's not a survey marker," and he put his horse a little faster and we left it behind us, and he didn't say anything else about it. I figured it was some old range thing, a sheep camp from 100 years back, and I let it go. I bring it up because of what I learned later about what a ring of stones like that is supposed to mean. But that afternoon it was just a curiosity I rode past. It was that second evening, sitting around camp, that the first thing happened that I didn't have a word for. The cattle we'd pushed up near the middle tank wouldn't drink from it. Del noticed it before either of us. He'd ridden back up after we'd rested to check on the bunch and make sure they were settling, and he came back into camp quiet. He told us the water in the tank was fine. He'd checked it. The float was working and the well was pumping and the tank was full and clean. but the cattle were standing off away from it, a good 30, 40 yards back, in a loose, ragged ring, and they weren't approaching to drink. Cattle that have been worked hard all day in July heat will mob a water tank. They'll crowd it 3 deep. And these were standing back from it, and he said a few of them weren't even looking at the water. They were standing with their heads up, facing out away from the tank, into the rocks and the brush to the northeast, the way an animal looks when it's watching for something. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured cattle were dumb and skittish, and probably there was a rattlesnake denned up in the rocks by the tank, or a coyote or a lion had come through and left a smell. Del didn't offer a theory. He just said it and then he got quiet, and he stayed quieter all through dinner than he'd been the night before. And a couple times I caught him looking off toward the northeast himself, toward the high country, not at anything I could see. I woke up that night sometime in the small hours, 2, maybe 3. I don't know what woke me. I lay on my cot for a while in the dark listening, and at first there was nothing, just the wind working at the canvas a little, and the small sounds of the horses on the picket. And then I realized the horses weren't making small sounds. They were dead silent, and they were standing all 3 of them facing the same direction, off to the northeast, toward the ridgeline that ran along above the upper part of the allotment, ears pricked hard forward, completely rigid. Not eating, not shifting their weight, not dozing on 3 legs the way horses do at night. Just standing and staring, all 3 pointed the same way like compass needles. I sat up on my cot and looked out through the tent flap. We'd left it tied half open for the air because it was a warm night. The moon was most of the way to full, and the high desert was lit up silver gray, and you could see a long way across the open ground. I looked where the horses were looking, and I didn't see anything. The ridge was a black line against the sky, and the slope came down off it pale in the moonlight, and there was nothing on it that I could pick out, nothing moving. But the horses held that stare. I watched them for what must have been 10 or 15 minutes, and they never broke it, never relaxed, just kept their heads up and their ears locked on the ridge. And the longer I watched, the more the feeling crept up on me that the reason I couldn't see anything wasn't that there was nothing there. It was that whatever was there was holding as still as the horses were. Eventually I lay back down and told myself it was a mountain lion working the country, which would explain the cattle off their water and the horses keyed up both, and that there was nothing unusual about predators on a cattle allotment, and after a long while I got back to sleep. I mentioned the horses to Del over coffee in the morning. I said they'd stood facing the ridge half the night, all 3 of them, frozen. He nodded slowly like I'd confirmed something he already knew, and he didn't tell me what. What he did say was that he wanted to get the rest of the herd pushed up that day, and he wanted us back in camp before dark. And there was a weight on those words, before dark, that I noticed and tucked away without understanding it. The 3rd day's work took us up higher and farther back, closer in under that ridge, finishing the gather and pushing the stragglers up toward the middle tank to join the rest. And the 3rd day is when the thing happened with the truck. Partway through the day, Del needed a part out of his truck, a fitting for one of the float valves that had been giving him trouble. And rather than ride all the way back down himself, he sent Caleb down on horseback to fetch it, and to bring one of the trucks up the 2-track that ran along the bottom of the allotment, so we could haul some salt and mineral blocks up to set out for the cattle. Caleb took off down toward camp, and Del and I kept working the bunch. And after a while we could see Del's truck come crawling up the 2-track, a little tail of dust hanging behind it, Caleb at the wheel. And I happened to be looking up past the truck, up at the ridge, which was maybe half a mile off and a few 100 feet above the road, and there was something moving along the top of it, keeping pace with the truck. I want to be careful here because this is the part where people listening start to decide whether you're worth believing. It was moving along the ridgeline at the same speed as the truck. The truck on that road was doing maybe 25-30 miles an hour, bouncing over the ruts. And this thing up on the ridge was matching it, holding even with it, over ground that was all broken rock and brush and ledge, the kind of ground you'd pick your way across, slow and careful on foot, the kind of ground that'd turn your ankle in a second. It was too far off to make out any detail. It read as dark and low to the ground, moving in a way that I'd have called four-footed, except that twice while I watched it came up, rose up off the ground to maybe the height of a standing man, held there a moment, and then dropped back down low and kept pacing the truck. It stayed even with that truck for what I'd guess was a quarter mile, and then it went over the backside of the ridge and was gone. I pointed it out to Dell while it was still happening. I said something like, "What is that? Up on the ridge, is that a guy?" He turned and looked, and he watched it the whole time until it dropped over the far side, and he didn't say anything while he watched. And when it was gone, he turned his horse back toward the cattle and he said, in a completely flat voice, "We're not going to talk about that. Not, I don't know what that was. Not probably just a deer. We're not going to talk about that." And the flatness of it, the finality, shut my mouth completely. Caleb hadn't seen any of it from down in the truck, with the angle and the dust and watching the road. We loaded the salt blocks into the bed, and Dell drove the truck back down himself while Caleb rode, and we finished setting out mineral, and we got back to camp before dark, like Dell wanted. And that evening, Dell did a couple of things he hadn't done the first 2 nights. He built the fire up bigger than he had before, a real fire, and he kept feeding it, and he sat up later. And at one point he got up without a word, and walked a slow, full circle around the entire camp, all the way around the outside of the tent, and the horses and both trucks, stopping every few steps to look out into the dark toward the high ground. When he came back to the fire, he told us both, when we turned in, to keep our boots on. Caleb asked him why, and Dell just said, "Because I'm telling you to, keep your boots on." And we did. I want to say something about Caleb because he changed across the middle of that week. He'd started out loose and joking, and by the 3rd and 4th day he'd gone quiet and watchful. I think he'd caught it off his uncle, the mood, even though Dell still wasn't explaining a thing. There's a way that fear travels between people without anybody naming it, where one person's wrongness becomes the whole group's wrongness, and that's what was happening to the 3 of us out there. By the 4th day, none of us were talking much, and we were all of us, I noticed, keeping half an eye on the high country during the day's work without saying so. There was a daytime thing on the 4th day too, before the night Caleb woke me. We were working the cattle in the late morning, the 3 of us spread out across a flat, and the wind was coming down off the high country toward us, steady, the way it does midday. And on that wind, 2 or 3 times over maybe half an hour, I heard somebody call out. A man's voice, far off, up toward the ridge, calling a word I couldn't make out. The way you'd call to a partner working the other side of a herd. The first time I heard it, I sat up and looked around to see which of us it was. And Dell was off to my left a couple 100 yards, and Caleb was off to my right about the same, and neither of them had their head up. Neither of them was the one calling. The second time I heard it, I rode over toward Dell and asked him, "Did you hear somebody? Is there another outfit working up here?" And he said, "There's no other outfit up here. This is all our lease." And he said it without any surprise in his voice, like he'd already heard it too and had decided what it was, and the decision was the same one he kept making about everything that week, which was that we weren't going to talk about it. The voice came once more after that, fainter, farther up the slope, and then the wind didn't carry it anymore. I told myself it was a trick of the wind through the rocks. That wind does strange things in broken country, makes sounds like voices, and I half believed that, and I half didn't, and we kept working. What I keep landing on, thinking back, is how good it was at sounding like exactly the thing that would draw you out. A voice calling the way a working partner calls. A man down at the water where there shouldn't be a man. It wasn't making noises to scare us off. Every wrong thing it did across that week was shaped like an invitation, like a reason to walk out toward it. And I think now that's the whole point of how it works. And I think that's what Dell understood that Caleb and I didn't, and it's why he kept telling us to keep our boots on, and to stay put, and to not give it our attention, and it's why none of us got drawn out of that camp until the night it decided it was done waiting, and came in after us itself. We'd had another long, hard day, the gather basically done, and we'd turned in. And sometime in the small hours, I came awake to Caleb crouched down beside my cot in the dark, shaking my shoulder. And he had his voice down to almost nothing, just breath, and he said, "There's a man at the tank." I asked him what he meant, half asleep. He said he'd gotten up to go relieve himself, and he'd stepped just outside the tent flap, and he'd looked down toward the lower tank, the one right there near our camp, and there was a man kneeling at the edge of it with his head down at the water, drinking out of it, down on his hands and knees, at the rim of the steel tank, drinking straight from it, he said, like a dog would. I got up and we both went to the tent flap and looked, and there was something at the tank. I'll be honest about what I could and couldn't see, because I want this to be true and not better than true. At that distance, which was maybe 80 or 90 yards, and in moonlight, I could not have sworn under oath that it was a person and not a deer or a stray calf come down to the water. It was the size of a grown man. It was down low at the rim of the tank, and there was a sense of motion to it, of something being done at the water. And as the two of us stood there watching it, it stopped, and it stood up. It stood up too fast, and it stood up too tall. I keep using that word tall, and I know it's not enough, but I don't have a better one. A tall man is 6'4", 6'5". This came up well past that. And it didn't stand the way a man stands, the bracing and the push and the unfolding. It came up off the ground in one single motion, straight up, like something pulling it from above by a wire, no effort to it. And then it was standing full height at the edge of the tank, and it was facing us. The two of us were dead still in the tent flap, and it was dead still at the tank facing the tent, and that held for what felt like a long time, and was probably half a minute. The two of us, and that thing just looking at each other across 90 yards of moonlit ground. I couldn't make out a face on it. I could just see the shape of it, too tall, standing wrong, facing us, and not moving. Then it turned and went up the slope away from us, and it did not run the way a man runs, and I've spent a lot of time trying to find words for how it moved that don't sound made up, and I haven't found them. It covered the ground wrong. Too much distance with each stride, and a hitch or a lope to it, a roll through the body that wasn't right. And it went up that slope and into the rocks, and was gone in a few seconds over ground that should have taken a man 2 or 3 minutes to climb. Caleb and I went back into the tent and woke Dell, and Caleb told him in a shaking voice what we'd seen, and Dell listened to all of it without interrupting. And then he sat there on the edge of his cot in the dark for a moment. And then he said we'd break camp at first light and push the herd the last stretch up to the top tank, and after that, he'd decide what we were going to do. He said it level, but I could hear underneath it that he was not level, that he was working hard to stay level. And then he said the thing that I've turned over in my head more than anything else from that whole week. He said, "Don't say what it is. Out here, you don't say what it is. You put your attention on a thing and you give it a name. You're telling it to come." And then he wouldn't say any more about it, and he told us to try to sleep, which neither Caleb nor I did. I lay on my cot with my boots on and my eyes open until the canvas started to go gray with morning. I asked Dell, while we were saddling and loading in that gray light, where he'd learned to talk like that. He was quiet for a while, working at a cinch, and then he told me. He said he'd grown up on the reservation, that his people were Dine, Navajo, and that he'd left young to go work cattle, and had spent his whole adult life around white cowboys, and had mostly set all of it down, the old things, the things you grow up around. But he said there are things you learn as a kid that you don't ever really unlearn, you just stop saying them out loud. And he told me that this allotment, this lease we were standing on, ran right up against country that his family would not set foot on, country that was understood to be left alone. And he said that when this lease had come open a few years back, it had gone cheap. Real cheap, he said. Cheaper than ground this good with water on it should ever go, and no local outfit had bid on it. And he'd known exactly why no local outfit had bid on it, and he'd put in for it anyway and won it because the grass was good and the price was practically a gift. And he'd told himself, at his age, after the life he'd lived, that he didn't believe in any of that anymore. That was the most he ever said to me, before or after. And he didn't say it like a man who was scared. He said it like a man owning up to something he'd known was a mistake while he was making it, and had made anyway. We pushed the herd the last stretch up to the top tank on the 5th day, and the top tank was the worst of the 3. The cattle up there were the first ones we'd moved, days earlier, and they were in a bad state, restless and bunched tight, and a couple of them had run themselves into the back fence hard enough to tear their hides on the wire. And they were all of them facing the same direction. Every animal in that bunch, a couple hundred head, was facing northeast, toward the high country beyond the fence, and they would not turn their backs to it. We tried to settle them, riding slow around them, giving them room, and they wouldn't settle. They just kept that bunched head-up facing posture, like a herd does when there's a predator standing in plain sight, except there was nothing there that any of us could see. Dell sat his horse and looked at those cattle for a long time without saying anything, and then he said, "We'd done what we could do here, and we'd pull out in the morning, and he'd come back for the herd later with a crew." He didn't say it, but I understood that the plan to leave the cattle on the good feed for the summer was finished, that we were going to leave, and that he was going to deal with the cattle some other way. The 5th night is the night it came into the camp. I've gone back over it more times than I can count trying to get the sequence right, and the honest truth is that pieces of it are just gone, blanked clean out, the way things go when your whole body dumps everything into your blood at once, and your memory stops recording properly. But I'll tell you what I have. We were all 3 in the tent, boots on, because Dell still had us sleeping in our boots. The fire had burned down to coals outside. I wasn't really asleep. I was in that gray no place where you're down but not under, and what brought me up out of it was the horses. They went off all at once, not the silent staring of the nights before, but full panic, screaming, throwing themselves against the picket line. And I heard one of the steel picket pins tear up out of the ground. And then there was a sound at the tent. It was at the back wall, the canvas wall behind Caleb's cot, down low near the ground, and it was the sound of something heavy dragging its weight along the outside of the canvas, a long, scraping pressure moving the length of the wall. And then the back wall of the tent came in. Not torn, not yet, just driven inward. The whole canvas wall belling in toward us like something big had thrown its full weight against it from outside. And Caleb's cot went over sideways, and Caleb went down off it onto the ground. And then the canvas tore. It came through, and it got him. It got him by the shoulder and the upper back, and it started hauling him out through the tear in the canvas, out backward into the dark. And he was screaming, a sound I'd never heard a person make and don't want to hear again. And Dell was up off his cot fast for a big old man, and he got both hands on Caleb's arm, and I got hold of Caleb's belt, and his other arm, and for a few seconds it was just that, a tug of war over a screaming kid, the 3 of us pulling him in, and the thing on the other side of the canvas hauling him out. And the strength on the other end of it was not a man's strength, and it was not a mountain lion's strength. I have braced against a horse pulling back on a lead. I have been knocked down by river current. The pull on the other end of Caleb was stronger than Dell and me together. And the worst part, the part I keep coming back to, is that it didn't feel like it was straining. It didn't feel like we were close to losing a hard contest. It felt like it was barely working at it, like it could have taken him whenever it wanted and was simply seeing whether we'd let go. What ended it was the fire, or the flame anyway. Dell let go of Caleb with one hand and reached up and grabbed one of the propane lanterns hanging lit from the ridgepole, and he tore it down and he threw it, still burning, out through the tear in the canvas at whatever was out there in the dark, and there was a sound. Not a roar, not a scream, a hard, sharp exhale, a huff, low and close, more felt than heard. And the pull stopped all at once, completely, and Caleb came back in on top of the 2 of us, and we all 3 went down in a heap on the floor of the tent. We didn't wait. We didn't pack one single thing. Dell hauled Caleb up off the floor by his good arm, and we got him up between the 2 of us, and we went out the front of that tent and ran for my truck because it was the closest of the 2. And we threw Caleb across the back seat and got in. Dell in the back with him and me behind the wheel, and I drove. Dell was working the whole way to keep pressure on Caleb's back and shoulder, with his own balled-up shirt, because the kid was bleeding badly, and I was driving that washboard 2-track in the dark, faster than any sane person would, the headlights bouncing wild all over the rock and the brush, the truck slamming through the ruts hard enough that I thought we'd break an axle. And I'll tell you the last thing I saw out there, and then I'll tell you how it ended. For the first mile or so down off that high ground, on the ridge that ran along above the road, something kept pace with us. I caught it twice in the swing of the headlights when the road bent that way, up on the rock, even with the truck, the way it had paced the truck in broad daylight 2 days before. That wrong, long-strided lope, eating up ground that no animal could cross at that speed. And then we came down off the allotment, crossed the cattle guard where the BLM land ended and the county road began, and it wasn't there anymore. It didn't come past the boundary of that land. It stopped at the edge of it like there was a line drawn that it would not cross, and behind us the high ground just sat there dark and empty under the moon as we pulled away. We got Caleb to the hospital in Moab a little before sunrise. He had 4 parallel gouges raked down his back and across his shoulder, deep ones, and his arm had been pulled clean out of the socket. The gouges didn't look like anything the staff there could place, didn't match any animal they knew, and there was a lot of asking what had happened out there, and Dell did the talking and he kept it vague and steady. Said an animal had gotten into our camp in the night, that we hadn't gotten a clear look in the dark. They put Caleb's shoulder back in, and they cleaned out the gouges and packed them, and admitted him, and a sheriff's deputy came by at some point and Dell told him the same thing, an animal in the camp, and the deputy wrote it down and didn't push. And I had the feeling, watching it, that it wasn't the first report like that he'd taken in that country. The wounds got infected, and not in a normal way. I drove back to see Caleb a couple of times over the next 2 weeks, and the gouges weren't closing the way wounds close, and the infection wasn't staying put. It kept traveling up through his arm and his shoulder, and the doctors switched his antibiotics once and then again, and for a stretch they couldn't get out in front of it. And there was a bad few days in there where I heard them talking, careful, about whether he might lose the use of the arm, about tissue that wasn't responding the way it should. And then it turned. Finally, slowly, it turned around and started healing, and he kept the arm, and he got most of the use of it back. He's got 4 long pale scars down his back now, and a shoulder that aches and stiffens up before a change in the weather. But he's all right. He's alive and he's all right. And given what had hold of him through that canvas, given that I felt how easily it could have just taken him, I understand that all right is something close to a miracle. Dell gave up the lease. He didn't go back up there himself for the cattle. He hired a crew of men to go in during daylight and gather the herd and bring it down off the allotment, and once the cattle were off, he let the lease lapse, and he never set foot on that ground again. The last real conversation I had with him, he told me again, plainer than before, that he had known better the entire time. That his family had told him their whole lives that the country up there was not to be used, was to be left alone, and that he had let cheap good grass talk him out of 50 years of knowing better, and that his nephew was the one who'd paid for it instead of him. He didn't say it dramatic or broken up. He said it the flat, steady way he said everything, the way a man states a fact he's made his peace with carrying. And here's the part that, for me, settles it. The reason I don't lie awake wondering if I talked myself into something out there in the dark and the exhaustion. A few years after all this, I had reason to drive that same county road again for a completely different job. And I had an hour to kill, and I drove up the 2-track onto the old allotment a little way, just far enough to see. The lower stock tank, the one that thing had been kneeling at and drinking from, had been capped, filled in with concrete, the float and the pipe pulled out, just a plug of gray concrete where the water had been. And later, back in town, I got to talking with an old guy who knew that country, and without my leading him to it, he told me that a rancher had picked up that lease the season right after Dell let it go, on account of how cheap it was, the same draw that had pulled Dell in, and that this fellow had lasted exactly 1 summer and then walked away from it too, and that after that nobody had touched it, and somebody, the BLM or the well outfit, had gone in and capped all 3 tanks so that no cattle could water up there at all. So it just sits empty now. Thousands of acres of good grass with water in the ground under it, and the snow on the La Salle standing up to the east of it, and not one head of cattle runs on it, and the tanks are sealed with concrete, And the handful of people who actually know that country could tell you exactly why, if they ever felt like talking about it, which they don't. I don't ranch. I never took another job like that one, and I never will. And Del was right about the one thing he kept putting to us out there, the thing I've held on to. So I've told you this whole long story, and gotten all the way to the end of it, without once saying the word for what came into our camp. And I'm not going to start now.